What up, what up, what up, IB Nation? We're back on a Tuesday, 1 o'clock, and that means we're going to talk a positional breakdown, and I'm excited about this one. I have to say, Brian, I'm Vince, that's Brian. Hello, how's everybody doing?
The OGs are back.
That's right.
Vince just got back off vacation, so he's a little rusty.
I'm a little rusty, that's right.
A little bit.
Yeah, but no, I'm excited about this position group, Brian, because I found myself when I was an offensive coordinator, and my history has been with quarterbacks, wide receivers, that kind of thing. But when I was an offensive coordinator and I did not have a position to coach, I found myself with the offensive line almost exclusively. Because no matter what you want to do offensively, it's not going to work if your offensive line isn't any good. I mean, flat out, you have to be good in the trenches.
You can scheme your way to success against teams where you maybe have better coaching or better talent, but to win at the level that Notre Dame is looking to win, right? Championships, Big Ten titles, ACC titles, Pac-12 titles, SEC titles, playoff appearances, playoff wins, national championships.
And the way they want to be offensively, right? I mean, the way that they want to operate offensively, they have to have a good offensive line.
Right. And it doesn't mean that you have to have like a bunch of first-round picks. Exhibit A, the last two Joe Moore Award winners have had 0 first or second-round picks, I believe. I know they haven't had any first-round picks. I don't think they've had any second-round picks either. I think of the Clemson offensive lines in 16 and 18, that I think the highest drafted kid on those two offensive lines was like 3rd or 4th round. They're starting left tackle for both of those teams went undrafted, right? But you know what they were as units? They were really good units, even without the individual star players. So what we know about Notre Dame this year, Vince, is that there's going to be star talent, but will they be a great unit? That's still a question mark. They were at times last season. And honestly, second half of the season, Vince, for a chunk of the second half of the season. But then we saw some slip-ups at times, not being able to run the ball against USC, which was partly USC was loaded to stop the run, not being able to really protect the quarterback at times against Navy. Some of that was the quarterback, not setting protections correctly, holding on to the ball. Hey, look, we're not blocking that guy. So if you get sacked by him, that ain't on us kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
We're blocking these 5. You have to take care of that guy. So those are all aspects of great line play. It's being able to play great as a unit. The 2017 unit had 2 great players, but it was a great unit because all 5 guys played at a high level, right? Same with the 2018 team. Same with the 2012 unit, which was the least talented of all the great offensive lines that Notre Dame has had. I mean, you had Zach Martin and Chris Watt, but Braxton Cave was coming off of an injury. He wasn't as good as he was pre-injury. Still solid player. Mike Golick Jr. was a solid veteran that, knew what to do, but wasn't a great player. Christian Lombard was young, still learning. It wasn't like it wasn't like the 17 line where you had Robert Haynes, he was a 3rd-round pick, and Tommy Kramer would have been drafted high if not for all the injuries. Starting in the NFL, even as an undrafted free agent, you had Alex Bars on that offensive line as well. Another guy that would have been drafted in the NFL if it wasn't for the injury. Sam Mustipher was a 3-year starter. He had 1st-round draft, top 10 NFL picks on the left side of the line. You have a lot of talent, man, at those positions. But did they play great as a unit? That remains to be seen. That 17 team did. The 16 team with basically the 4 of the 5 same players did not.
Right.
So it's about getting them onto the same page, Vince. And the interesting thing is we have had another coaching change, 3rd new coach in 3 years, and that's going to be a very interesting part of this conversation.
Well, we've had this discussion about transition from one O-line coach to another O-line coach. I mean, you and I have done this, right? We've talked about this, and we've talked about what that transition looks like, and when are we going to know if that transition is a smooth one, and all of these different things. Well, going from Quinn to Hiestand, I think we can all agree, whether you liked Quinn or not, or whether you like Hiestand or not, we can all agree it was a good transition.
Yes.
Now you've got Harry Hiestand taking a step back into retirement. You got Joe Rudolph coming in. What is that transition going to look like? That's a big deal that I think a lot of people are overlooking right now. And we talk about the offensive line and depending on what service you're looking at, where they're ranked going in as a unit and all of these different things. Like, people forget that there's a brand new offensive line coach here.
Right.
And what is that effect going to have on this unit? And I think the jury's still out, obviously. We saw some spring ball. Okay. We got fall ball coming up here real soon. That's going to be one of the things from a coaching standpoint that's going to hold our attention big time is what is this team going to look like I should say, excuse me, what is this unit going to look like under new leadership and the style of Joe Rudolph versus the style of Harry Hiestand?
Yeah. I'm sorry, Vince. So I got to make this little,
No.
people talking about another show. If you're going to be in this chat, let's talk about like this show, right? Not somebody else's show. To your point, Vince, here's the question, right? Is Joe Rudolph, is he more Harry Hiestand?
Right.
Or is he more Jeff Quinn? And if he's somewhere in between, how far in what direction? Is he like not quite Coach Hiestand, which is going to be very hard to do because Coach Hiestand's a legend, right? Is he going to be closer to that? Is he going to be right in the middle? Is he going to be a little closer to Quinn, like a better version of Jeff Quinn, but still comparable to Jeff Quinn? We don't know the answer to that, right? His Wisconsin offensive lines were good, at times really good, at times just good, not great, but good. But he inherited a pretty good situation, right? Where they had already established a pretty darn good offensive line when he showed up. And he was able to kind of keep it rolling for a while. Now, is he going to be able to do the same thing at Notre Dame? That's the question. Can he keep it rolling? One thing about it, Vince, is we really don't know the answer, right? We don't know. I don't know Joe Rudolph that well. You don't know Joe Rudolph that well. We can watch all the film of Wisconsin that we want, but it's a different offense. It's different personnel. There's all types of things that are different. He's not the offensive coordinator anymore. And then number two, I will say the one thing that I am at least confident in, however, is that the foundation of what's important matters as much to him as it did to Harry Hiestand. And that was the biggest thing. So when he interviewed for the job, there was a couple other coaches they interviewed at the time. And the feedback I got from different sources is the reason Joe Rudolph made the biggest impact with the players, because that's the guy. I won't say that the players wanted him over other coaches because I don't know the answer to that. I was never told that.
Right.
But I was told this, is that one-on-one went better with him than it did with any of the other coaches that interviewed. And the reason why is because the players, right or wrong, had this vision of, all right, this is the stuff, like even players that don't necessarily like how Coach Hiestand coaches, because that's always going to be true. Every coach, you've had players that don't like how you coach. I've had players that don't like how I coach. That's true of everybody. But what it comes down to is the foundation. Smart Vince. The foundation is he was basically saying the same things that Coach Hiestand said to these players, because the point is, those kids, some of them may not have liked how Coach Hiestand went about his business, but when he talked about this is important, this is important, this is important, man, it was like seared into their brains. So when Joe Rudolph shows up for his interview and he's talking about, this is what I care about, this is what I care about, this is what we're going to do in practice, this is what I believe in, this is who we are, the players are like, yep, that's what Coach Hiestand cared about. Right. And then how are you going to go about getting that? Like, that moved the kids a lot. And so when he interviewed, that skyrocketed him up on their side. He was already somebody that I think Marcus Freeman had a high opinion of and cared and wanted to obviously like.
That's why he brought him in. I mean, that's why he got an interview, right?
Correct.
Yeah, right.
But when the players kind of, and I was told this pretty much like right away, like that night after his meeting, I got a call and it was like, dude, he knocked that out of the park. I'm like, okay, what do you mean? Like, the players were raving about his interview. I'm like, why? He said, because he basically was repeating everything that Harry Hiestand told them matters to offensive line play. Not that he was doing it because, Coach Hiestand sat him down and said, this is what's important, but that's just what he believes in. And then when I reach out to people post spring, the thing I hear is those things he said he cared about were emphasized in the spring. Now, they're still a work in progress, but it wasn't just interview talk. It was stuff that he emphasized in practice. Now, does that mean he's going to put a great offensive line on the field this year? No, it doesn't. We still don't know that.
Right.
But those are at least some encouraging signs to me that he's going to – how he coaches is much different than Coach Heastan. There's going to be things that he's good at that maybe Coach wasn't, or things that Coach Heastan was great at that maybe he isn't. But at the end of the day, what it comes down to is this is a guy that believes in the foundational things of toughness, playing with great pad level, being technicians, being physical at the point of attack, all that kind of stuff are things that he believes in. And so it gives me at least a sense of confidence that this is at least going to be a top 10 offensive line. Now, will it be, Lindy's and Athlon have it ranked 5th and 6th respectively? Will it be that good? Or will it be, top 3? Or will it be close to what Phil Steele says, which is, top 15?
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to find out.
Yeah, and that's the difference, right? I mean, they've got the talent without the coaching to be top 15. I think we can all agree with that, right?
Right. Top 10. I mean, at the very least. Like, I was disappointed when Phil Steele had them 15th, Vince. I'm not gonna lie. I was a little like, whoa.
Yeah,
like that surprises me.
I was just going with it because, he put that out there. You know what I mean?
Right.
Okay,
right.
Talent-wise, fine, whatever. But the coaching is what's going to put them over the top. And what is that coaching going to look like? Like, I want to get as close to the offensive line individual drills as I can on day one, because I want to hear, our fundamentals is that at the forefront this early in practice, because that's what it should be. We're not talking scheme. We're not talking the big picture stuff on day one, because remember, they're not going to be in pads. They're going to be in helmets. Like, what kind of fundamentals are being stressed, because to me, what you hear out of a coach's mouth on day one, that's what the heart of a coach, that's who you are as a coach, because you want to make sure you're getting across what you want these guys to know right away, right? And it could be different from what you hear in October, right? Because now you're refining big picture stuff and you're talking scheme. And of course, you're still hammering some fundamental stuff. But what are they doing week one? And we're going to be there on day one. We're going to be there early on day 2. Like, what is coming out of Joe Rudolph's mouth in those days? Like, that is going to tell me a lot about who he is as a coach and what he stresses as a coach. And it's going to be one of the things we're paying attention to. There's a bunch of other things, obviously, but when we're talking about the offensive line, what's coming out of Joe Rudolph's mouth is going to be pretty much front row for me as to who I think this offensive line is going to be and who he's going to be as a coach. And it's going to go a long way, and we're going to talk about, obviously, individuals and what they're bringing back and what the depth chart looks like and all of those things. But at the end of the day, man, it's all about what's coming out of his mouth and what he stresses as a coach.
Because Notre Dame under Heastan, Vince, had a tradition of being physical. Even when they weren't effective in certain games, they never were. They were outplayed sometimes. They were rarely outfought. Like, even when Georgia 2017, Georgia outplayed Notre Dame in 2017. They didn't outfight Notre Dame, right? Like, they didn't, like, Notre Dame, guys didn't want to compete. They didn't play hard. They played hard. They just didn't play well.
Sure.
And there's a difference. And so is Coach Rudolph going to do that? Can he get out of these players that mindset of we're going to go out there and beat your face in? You know what I mean? Like, that's the mentality that you want to have. Can he get that out of this offensive line? Now, part of me says yes, because you just go look at some of the Wisconsin offensive lines. Now, part of it is they had a couple times had some great backs, but Vince, I don't care how good your back is. I really don't. And Jonathan Taylor was a phenomenal back. You don't have a guy rush for 2,000 yards in back-to-back seasons and only miss it a third year because as a true freshman, he only had 1,977 yards, right? You don't do that if your offensive line, I mean, just because your running back is great. Right. You don't. Right. You do that because your offensive line is also doing its job. Can he do that in the type of schemes that Jared Parker wants to utilize without a fullback, without playing 12 personnel all the time? That's a legitimate question. But at the end of the day, if the emphasis on technique is there, as you mentioned, and they're a team that goes out there and says, we're going to play physical football every snap, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to take your will to compete away.
Right.
Right? Like that's what Harry Heastand's offensive line tried to do. We're trying to take away your will to line up against me and bring it every play. And we saw it happen when this offensive line was great. You think of the 2015 team did that at times. The 2017 team did that a lot. I mean, whether it was BC, whether it was USC, whether it was, NC State, it didn't matter. Like they made teams kind of no moss that sucker that year, especially, and USC was the biggest culprit of that. I mean, we've talked about, there were times when Rasheem Green, who was a third-round draft pick, just like turning his back at the snap, just like engaging and then just, giving it to him.
Right.
It's like, it's just like, okay, yeah, that guy's whipped. That guy's whipped mentally, right? It's one thing to whoop a guy physically.
Yes.
But can you whip him mentally, right? Like, you think of like Rocky. Rocky physically got beat a lot, right? And and we know boxers like this that can take a beating. Like you may have beat me physically, but I stood there with you the entire fight and I went toe to toe with you. I never backed down because you can't beat me mentally. And that's what Notre Dame did to people at times is they beat you so bad physically that they didn't beat you mentally.
They take
Can
your
this
will,
unit be like
right?
that? I don't know. We don't know the answer to that, but the closer they get to that, the better they're going to be. Because at the end of the day, Vince, here's why it matters. If this team is going to reach its full potential, this offensive line has to play at a high level. Do they have to win the Joe Moore Award? I honestly, at the end of the day, I only care about that from a perception standpoint. I don't actually care about that, like from a practicality standpoint, because the 2015 offensive line didn't win the Joe Moore Award, and that was the best offensive line in college football in 2015. So I don't really care if they win the award or not. I care that they go out there and play at a high level. I felt that the 2020 offensive line was the best in college football. Didn't win the Joe Moore Award, but you know what they did? They were the foundation and the catalyst for a playoff run. They rode that offensive line's backs to the playoff that year. Now, can this unit be that? I don't know. But here's why it matters, Vince. Because I truly believe with the addition of Sam Hartman, in the presence of Audric Estime in that backfield and the skill talent they have, that if this offensive line can play at the level that it's capable of, this offense is going to be incredibly productive. Because you have an offensive line that has the potential to be very balanced. It's not going to be a run-dominant offensive line like the 2017 line was. I think it has a chance to be more like the 15 line, a little bit more kind of like the 2020 offensive line. I thought was a pretty good balanced offensive line where they were good at pass pro. They were good at run blocking. 17 offensive line was good at pass blocking, but they could be beat there. They could be vulnerable there to certain things because they were so aggressive and so physical at times. This offensive line has a chance to be very balanced. You laid the foundation with Coach Heastand. Can you build on it? That's going to be the question. And this team cannot reach its full potential if this offensive line doesn't play at a high level. And the other part of it, too, is if this offensive line plays at a high level and they start out in fall camp being that, right, it's going to make the other line be even better as well.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And that's a big part of this as well, because we're going to eventually get we actually already had the defensive line preview. I mean, that unit is as important to the defense as this unit is to the offense.
Right.
And you need it to be sort of one of those iron sharpens iron type of things where, like Mike Elko said in 2017, you remember when he said this about the offensive line? Those guys are like, what did he say? He's like, they're like human lie detectors.
Yeah.
Right. Like if you don't bring it that day, they will expose you.
Right. Because we were like, man, the defensive line just isn't doing, like, we were getting worried about the defensive line that year. Right. But it's because they were going up against the offensive line, and the offensive line was really, really good.
Right.
And then finally, when they weren't going up against Notre Dame's offensive line, the defensive line just started eating. It was like, okay, now we get it. This offensive line's really, really good.
Yep.
Yeah.
Speaking of really, really good, Vince.
You want to talk about the tackles? Is that the direction you want to go at this point? So this is an interesting transition because, both of these guys, when we're talking about Fisher and Joe Alt, they were, Fisher was starting as a freshman. Joe Alt ended up starting as a freshman.
Beat out. Blake Fisher beat out Joe Alt as a true
that's
freshman.
A good point. That's a very, very good point. And then Joe Alt was the fourth option at left tackle that year, which in hindsight,
they went Tosh Baker, Blake Fisher, Michael Carmody, Tosh Baker, and they all got hurt.
Yeah.
And then he eventually moved to Joe Alt,
who was wearing 45 at the time, and then they had to put him in his actual number.
Sure. Yeah. Because he was playing tight end. Right.
Right. Yes. Right. That's another conversation. But no. So these guys are going into their third year. And I realize Fisher is a redshirt sophomore because he has his injury year. But they're going into their junior years. They're not the new kids on the block anymore. Like, these guys are the veterans of this line. And I'm not forgetting about Zeke Correll, but your anchors at tackle need to be your anchors at tackle. They're not the young guys anymore. They're not the guys, hey, man, they're overachieving. They're doing a great job. You know, they could be really, really good, really, really good someday. They're good right now. They could be really, really good. This is the time where they need to be really, really good. Like, this is their moment, right? Because ask anybody, do we really think Joe Alt is going to be here in 24? No, I don't think Joe Alt is going to be here in 24. Fisher? Yeah, I think he'll probably be back, but he could have a big year and he might go too. I mean, depending, because we all know how highly valued tackles are in the NFL, right? So we're going to talk about all these guys. They're only going to go as far as these two guys take.
Yes. They have to be the bookends, right? We talk about this. They have to be the best offensive line offensive tackle tandem in college football. Yes. They have a potential to be so. They need to be. And if they're not, then this offensive line can't reach its full potential, right? I mean, it just can't. Notre Dame has to get great offensive line play or offensive tackle play if this line's going to play to its potential. You know, you look at Joe Walden, it's just kind of like, just keep doing what you're doing, right? Keep going out there and keep doing what you're doing, right? Be consistent, right? Just a steadily dominant player. And then, you hope that he makes some sophomore year growth.
Sure.
Right. You hope that he goes out there and maybe he's a little bit more forceful in the run game, which I thought he was second half of the year, Vince. I thought that one of the more underrated parts of Joe Alt's game was he became during last season a much better run blocker. And I think that was that Harry Hiestand influence on him, right? Which is, being a more physical player. Now he's going to be a year older, a year stronger in the weight room and all those type of things.
Right.
And you go out there and you feel like, hey, this is a guy that has a chance to be truly dominant. I thought he was great last year, but there's being great, meaning you execute your job at a high level every snap. And then there's being dominantly great, right? Like we've seen, like Liam Eichenberg in 2020 was great. Orlando Pace was dominant, destructive, right? Like, so there's those, and then where does Joe Alt fall in between those two? That's going to be the question with him. But it's really the key, though, is Fisher. Because if Joe Alt simply just repeats what he did last year, he's an All-American.
He's an All-American.
Because he was last year.
Right. He's an All-American and he's going to the NFL.
He was either a first or a second-round draft pick with everybody last season.
Right.
And he wasn't, I don't think he was a consensus All-American because a couple of the main ones had him as a second teamer, but everybody had him first or second team, right? Well, the guys that were ahead of him are gone. They're in the NFL now. So if he just repeats last year, most likely he's a first round guy, but more important, first team guy, but more importantly, he's a really good left tackle. I mean, Sam Hartman's going to have no issues with this blind side of Joe Alt just repeats what he did last year. You'd like to see him get better now that because he was a true sophomore last year. Now that he's a junior. But to me, the key is Blake Fisher. When Blake Fisher was on his game, he was really good. The problem is that we never really saw him on his game consistently. And a lot of it goes back to what you said earlier, Vince. He was a redshirt freshman, and not just a typical redshirt freshman. He was only a redshirt freshman because of an injury that kept him from practicing almost the entire year. That's the big thing. It wasn't so much like Billy Shrouth will be a redshirt freshman this year, but he practiced the entire year.
Right.
He was part of the team the entire year.
Yeah.
Right. Blake got hurt in game one, couldn't practice until late in the season, and then in bowl prep. That's the difference. And so I actually think, even though they're in the same grade, I think that's another reason why I think Blake is poised to make an even bigger jump than Joe is capable of, because it's like Joe is going to get better because he gets a little bit stronger now that he's a junior. But I don't know how much better technically he can be. You point a snap here, snap there that needs to be better, right? With Blake, there's a lot of consistency that was lacking last year that you'd kind of expect from a typical redshirt freshman. Then when you throw in the fact that he missed almost the entire season, meaning he couldn't even practice because of the knee injury, you understand why he was inconsistent last year. but you've got that under your belt. Now it's time to go out and take that next step. And my hope is that he's put on a little bit of weight back on, good weight back on, and then he plays with just a little bit more. That's going to be the key for him, right? Consistency with a year under your belt, but just play with a little bit more force. I don't want to say fire because the fire makes it seem, Vince, like he wasn't
like
playing hard
or something.
That's not what I'm saying. It's like I think Blake was still thinking a lot as a young guy, getting his technique down. It's more about force. I want to see Blake come off and not just body people. I want to see him come off and just drive those hips into guys and bury people.
Yeah.
That's what I want to see from Blake this year. Because at the end of the day, him getting better is the key to this tackle tandem being what it's capable of. Joe Walt just can't regress. They need Blake to take that jump. So Joe Walt gets all the pub, rightfully so. He's a great player. But Blake Fisher really holds the key to this tackle tandem playing to its potential, Vince. Absolutely.
Well, and I think it's a natural progression for Blake Fisher, right? I mean, we're not asking him to do something that he's not capable of. We're asking him to take that natural progression from second-year starter as a redshirt sophomore, that natural progression, that's all we're asking for. And we think that that's very possible. Now, how big of a jump that is going to determine how good the tackles are. I mean, that's because he's going to take a jump. Like, there's no way he stays the same. There's no way he's plateaued and he's going to be the same player he was last year. I'm sorry, there's no way. So it's, okay, he's going to take a natural progression. He's going to take that jump, but how much of a jump is that? I think that's the question mark about Blake Fisher going into this year. He's going to take that jump. How big is it? And if I was a betting man, I'd say it's going to be a sizable jump. I do, because the key thing that you said that I think really stands out to me is the mental side of it, the thinking, right? And we talk about this all the time. The less thinking that you do because you know where you're supposed to be, the better athlete that you can be, the more aggressive you can be, the faster you're going to be to get from point A to point B, right? Because you're not thinking about it, because because you've been in this position before. Played all year last year. He's seen it all. How does that translate to this year? Now he can just go out and play because it's not, and I'm not saying the lights were too bright. I'm not saying any of that. He was a first-year starter.
Vincent, I'm glad you said that, because a lot of times when people say, guys thinking too much, like, well, is he not smart? No, it's an experience thing. And I mean, could it be for some people it's not smart? That's not an issue for Blake Fisher.
Right.
I've used this example before, right, Vince? You know what I'm talking about. First time you go pick up a girl at her place for a date. You're looking at street signs. You and I are old enough to where we were looking at the map, right? Not on our phone, but no, not on our phone. When we're teenagers, bro,
like it was printed out MapQuest directions, like
that. There you go. Or I used a real map because for my dad, we actually had map books, right? So to go serve subpoenas and stuff.
Did you ever get in trouble for not holding it right?
No, it was a map book. It wasn't.
Oh,
it was like
okay.
A book. Like you turn pages, right?
Gotcha.
And so, but you're looking, you're like, okay, we got to turn left on here. Or she gives you the instructions, but you're looking for the road. You're not sure. There's an uncertainty. You know how to drive. Right. It's not that you're not smart enough to drive. You just don't know where you're going. Am I going left? Am I going right? Am I going straight? But fifth time you go pick her up at her house, you're just cruising.
Yeah.
Right. You know exactly where you're going. Right. Your intelligence level overall didn't change. You didn't become 20 IQ points higher.
Right.
Experienced getting there consistently allowed you to kind of learn how to do that. And so it's an experiential thing. It's once it becomes mentally, like the body, the muscle memory of the technique, you're not thinking about, okay, pick my left foot up, put that down 6 inches, then bring my right foot, bring my hands, where it's just, okay, bam, I'm going. Right. And I know who I'm going to do. I know the angle I need to attack this guy. I know what I need to do if he tries to go high. I know what I need to do if he tries to go low. Like, I've got all this figured out. If right. I know the technique to get here. I know who we're tag teaming with. I know when I've got to, make a call to get, hey, like last year, Blake and Joe really both weren't going to be like, hey, Drew, they're showing this. Let's check to this. This year, they might be like, hey, this guy's walking up. Hey, we need to
right.
Check to whatever so I can go get this guy or something like that. Where it's not even like thinking like, oh shoot, what am I supposed to do in that guy? And that's what you're doing in your first year start on the offensive line, especially playing for Harry Heastand, because he's not going to be holding back on you. Right. And being like, well, Blake's just a redshirt freshman. No, he's going to expect greatness from you. And I think that's going to do wonders for Blake. And now that he's got
Yeah.
that experience, I think the mental part will be there, but now the body part needs to follow up, Vince, where he goes from being a flashy kid to a consistently effective player that plays with more fire. That's what I want to see for Blake. The talent's there. That's never been a question.
Absolutely.
And then, we've talked about Loose Emoji used to say this. He used to tell me, he told me that Joe Moore would go in every year, and he said his first goal was to get his tackles situated. Right, that was priority number one. And then number two, it was make sure you're good at center. I would argue that there's an argument to be made that in today's game, you actually have to start up the middle first. You have to be good there because of what the center requires. Zeke Correll's a kid that had just struggled to really stay healthy his first couple years. Steps into the starting lineup in 2020. I actually thought played well, Vince. I thought he played very well against North Carolina. I thought he played pretty well against Alabama. And I mean, that was his first two starts, was on the road against North Carolina. And then in the national semifinal game against Alabama, they move him to guard the next year, and he struggles big time. He was just not comfortable there, really played poorly. The question last year was, would he be able to get his mind right after the struggles and get back to playing confidently? First couple games, Vince, I think we saw the same guy we saw a little bit last year. Just not sure of what he was doing, not playing aggressively because there was uncertainty, not playing with force, not playing with good pad level, which a guy like Zeke Correll should never lose the pad level battle. And you're just like, I don't know, but it's kind of like the second half of the Cal game. The light went on a little bit for Zeke. And he just got better and better as the year went on. And even at times when he would initially get beat, Vince, I think of a play, and this happened a few times last year, where the nose tackle beat Zeke off the ball. Do you remember this play?
Mm-hmm.
And he pushes Zeke back and he rocks him. And Zeke, you can just see it. He anchors his feet
down,
and then
man.
drives the guy backwards.
Yep.
Like, that's a really impressive play. Now, I would like to get to the point where Zeke doesn't get knocked back or lose the leverage battle at the snap. But it is an impressive thing to be able to get knocked back, because normally when you get rocked back, you're done. But to see him re-anchor, reset, and get a push says, okay, this kid's talented. Like, not even just about knowing what to do. This kid's got some talent. Now it's about the consistency. And Zeke is one of those. Somebody said, what game was that? One of them was Syracuse. It happened a few times last year.
Yeah, because
right. But Syracuse is the one that just always pops in my head. And so, Vince, when you look at Zeke, he's got a little bit of Blake in him, in that you could tell at times last year he was still thinking, okay, hold on, am I picking up this guy? And the Ohio State game was especially bad for him because those delayed blitzes they threw at him just whooped his butt. By the end of the year, he's picking that stuff up. He's got a better sense of that. So I think the year under his belt and being able to play a full season and be healthy for a whole season is going to do wonders for Zeke. And, you look at Athlon, or Lindy's has, Joe Wald is the number one offensive tackle coming back college football. That's Zeke Correll, number 8 at center. I think he's got a shot to be that guy if he's not already, and maybe jump into the top 5. It just is going to, like Blake Fisher, for Zeke Correll to really have the impact that he's going to need. It's just going to require consistency, just being able to do it snap after snap at a higher level, play with a little bit more force. Because when Zeke plays like with force, he can move people, and that's what you need to see from him this year. So I liked what I saw from Zeke as the year went on. Like early on, Vince was like, maybe he's just never going to, maybe the injuries have taken too much from him. And maybe he lost some confidence last year at guard. But by the second half of Cal, you're like, all right, I think he might be all right. And then North Carolina and BYU, and you're like, okay, Zeke's going to be all right.
Right.
And by the end of the year, he was a quality football player. Now he needs to go from being a quality football player to a really good football player. Leadership-wise, consistency-wise, and that's production-wise. Yeah,
that's the big key. So I've always been a fan of Zeke, and I know you have too. And it was hard for me to watch 21 after 20. It just was
because there was so much promise in 20.
Yes, we were championing him when he played in 20, and then he didn't play very well. I mean, he was out of position, didn't play well. I mean, he didn't play well in 21. And it was just hard. It was just hard to watch. And I was so happy that last year he kind of started to put it all together, right? Well, this is the year now. He's going to have 2 new starters on either side of him, right? He's going to have good tackles, but he's going to have 2 new starters on either side of him.
Mm-hmm.
You need, if you're going to do that, I mean, and there's a certain maturation when you're talking about an offensive line, losing guys and all those different things. You're going to have new guys. It is what it is. If you're going to have 2 new guards, having that rock at center from a leadership standpoint, from a play standpoint, from an execution standpoint is critical, in my opinion. It's critical because in a lot of offenses, and you can correct me here if I'm wrong, because I'm not 100% sure if Notre Dame does this, the center's making a lot of the line calls. I mean, you have to be on your stuff.
The quarterback's got to make calls. I mean, he's got to make protection checks, and I believe Jared Parker will do the same thing. But within that, yes, the center's got to make a lot of calls.
Right.
And even if the quarterback is making protection checks, the center is setting who we're working with and who the numbers are, like in run game. So like the center, so the quarterback may say, hey, we're doing a mic protection. I'm checking to a mic protection. Well, a lot of times the center's got to identify who the mic is.
Right.
Right. And he's got to say, hey, now he may be wrong, but if he's wrong, everyone's wrong at the same time, meaning you can still get the job done, meaning we know who we are treating as the mic, and we're gonna be able to get the job done. Or hey, you and I, hey, I'm making a call, you're working with me, and we're going together. So yes, it requires a lot of communication, and the center still does. I don't think it's quite as much as it used to be.
Okay, gotcha.
Now, and that's just in general with college football as a whole, because quarterbacks are doing more because they're in the shotgun. But yes, center still have to do a lot when it comes to and center should be able to look back at the quarterback and be like, no, right? Like,
right.
Exactly. No, you just made your check. Like, no, hold on a second. We need, you know what I mean? There needs to be that kind of communication.
And that's where I want I want my leader. That's where I want, like, the center needs to know what everybody's doing. Like, it's that one of those kinds of situations. And we're talking about a guy who's been in this program for a long time. And he's a leader, and he knows what is supposed to happen, who's supposed to go where, and all of those different things. So if we're going to have 2 brand new guards, I love the fact that Zeke Correll is where Zeke Correll is, because he's going to make sure those guys are going in the right direction. Right now, it's up to those guys then to execute that.
Sure.
But having Zeke Correll there in the middle makes me, and I'm sure Joe Rudolph, just like kind of take that breath. You know what I mean? Because that they're at least going to be told to go in the right place, and and all of that. And I echo obviously everything that you said about his strength and his physicality and kind of where he took his game last year. I'm excited to see where his game goes this year. Right. What is that step going to look like for him?
Because Vince, it's just one of those things where it's kind of the same story with Blake Fisher. Like, we know the talent is there because we've seen it.
Right.
I mean, if you want to know what an offensive line that with Blake Fisher and Zeke Correll can look like, I'll point to it again. Go watch the Clemson game. Now, you want to see that on a more consistent basis. Go watch the Boston College game. Go watch the Syracuse game. There are games you can point to and say, that's an example of what I'm talking about. Now the key is just being able to do it week after week after week.
Yeah.
And that's going to be the big question mark for this unit is, can they be that? And it really comes down to, if Zeke and Blake aren't playing consistently good football, then it's going to be harder for Billy and whoever wins the other guard spot to do the same, especially the right guard, because at least the left guard, which we believe is going to be Billy Schrouth, has Joe Walt beside him, which helps, right? And he's going to have Zeke in the middle. But the right side of the line is not going to be the great thing about the 17 offensive line is Quentin Nelson and Mike McGlinchey were the stars. Nobody questions that. But what made that line so good is that you could run behind Alex Bars and Tommy Kramer really effectively. I remember breaking this down that year, and if I remember correctly, on runs that went behind to the left side, either so like left called runs to the left, so like counter to the left, outside zone to the left, plays like that, or inside zone to the right, because as you know, inside zone to the right is meant to cut back behind the left. So any of those runs, I think they averaged something like almost like 7 yards a carry that year. It was like 6.8, 6.9, something like that. But then and I'm hoping to be able to do these numbers again this year because I miss doing that stuff. But when they ran to the right side of the line that year, they averaged 5.9 yards per carry. Part of the reason they were at 5.9 is they had like 7 or 8 like 1 to 2 yard touchdown runs because teams would overload the left side,
And
so they'd punch it in on the right side.
Right.
And those are really good numbers for your like not dominant side of the offensive line. A lot of teams would love their dominant side to allow you to rush for 5.9 yards per carry when we run in your direction. And that's what made that line so good is if Quentin Nelson and Mike McGlinchey were great players, but the right side wasn't really good, then they wouldn't have been a great offensive line. And that's going to be the key is you expect the left side to be pretty darn good because it's got Joe Walt on it. From center out to the right, can they be really good? That's going to determine just how good this offensive line can be. Because we're going to talk about newcomers and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, Vince, if your vets aren't playing great, then you can't rely on your newcomers to carry you. You can't. You're not going to blame Billy Schrouth or Andrew Kostofik or Rocco Spindler or Charles Jagasaw or Ashton Craig or whoever else might win that starting right guard job. If like, man, that guy didn't play well. Well, neither did Blake or Zeke, right? That's that's truly the problem. Because I believe veterans like that elevate the guy in between them. And that's the point I think you were making, Vince, is if Zeke and Blake are playing with the consistency they need and the confidence they need, they're going to elevate whoever that guard is.
You bring them along with you. I mean,
and then same thing with Billy Schrouth. Is now Billy can just go play because between Joe and Zeke, they're always going to tell me what to do. They're going to tell me who I'm working with.
And you just go and you just play.
And then we just go ball. Right. Exactly. And that's going to be the key. And that's partly why I'm really looking forward to this because you do have that it's like if you're going to have 3 starters coming back, you want one of 2 things to be true. You want your center just out to a side to be set, right? So you don't want like your center, your right guard, and your left tackle. You either want your center, left guard, left tackle, or center, right guard, right tackle, or you want tackles, center. That's what those are the 2 ideal scenarios if you're only going to bring 3 starters back,
right?
And that's where Notre Dame is. So
I think
that's you're going to have to play at a high level.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of these open spots, or at least open as from a standpoint of
they're all open.
They're all
open, but we think we at least have a better idea of who one of those starters is going to be.
Let's start on the left side because you already brought it up. Billy Schrouth, we think, is kind of the heir apparent to the left guard spot. What we saw from him in the spring left me believing that he's going to be the starting left guard. Yeah. I mean, nothing that he did made me think that he wasn't going to grab that spot. And yes, were there some redshirt freshman mistakes and some things? Absolutely. No doubt about it. But when he's on,
there will be more.
There will be. Absolutely. Yeah. But when he's on and when he gets a hold of somebody, I mean, there's a reason that he's going to start on the left side. And I would say he's in a pretty darn good situation starting next to an All-American and a 5th-year senior at center. So I believe that's what he is. He's a 5th-year senior at this point, right?
Zeke is, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, he still has another year of eligibility, right?
He can come back at 24. So great situation for a kid who was highly touted coming in, who put in the work as a true freshman, is now getting an opportunity as a redshirt freshman to come in and start. There's going to be bumps in the road. Anybody that thinks otherwise is just not realistic. But when he's on, and he's going to be on more often than he's not. And it's going to be fun to watch.
The thing about Billy, Vince, is he's a traditional redshirt freshman. I mean, he didn't really play last year. I think he played a snap because he was banged up a little bit early in the season. So I don't actually. I think I'm going to look right now. I believe that he only played 1 snap last year, if that. So let me just find out real quick. Yeah, Billy Schrouth. I don't. He might not even played any snaps last year. Let me try and find that because one thing that hurt Notre Dame a little bit last season was that so many of their games were competitive that shouldn't have been competitive. I mean, they should have got backups in against Marshall. They should have been able to get backups in against Cal.
So many missed opportunities in that regard last year. No doubt about that.
Right. And then of course with Billy missing the spring because of an injury and all that kind of stuff. But by the end of the year, you started hearing the rumblings from different coaches and different sources and different players and different parents and stuff like that. You're like, man, this Billy Schrouth kid's going to be really good. He put on a lot of weight, a lot of good weight, probably put on like 20 pounds in his first year. And when you see him in the spring, you're like, that's some pretty good weight. That's a big boy. Now, he was also a guy that was very highly regarded, right? That was a really good 2022 offensive line class, and he was the best of the bunch. And I know some people had Emil Wagner ranked higher. Billy was the best guy in that group. And a very strange recruitment, right? Committed to Notre Dame before they really had an offensive line coach, basically. I mean, they knew that Coach Quinn was still the offensive line coach when Billy committed. But he was told that Coach Quinn wasn't going to be back. I mean, that decision had already been made. And so he didn't commit to Notre Dame when Harry Hiestand got hired. He was already signed. And Tommy Rees had a big role in that recruitment. And it was huge that they got him because he was the one guy that you just battled with to the very end with Michigan and Wisconsin to get. And for a while there, some Michigan people were saying, hey, it's Michigan, it's Michigan. And, we kept hearing that it was going to be Notre Dame, and ended up being Notre Dame.
That one went so long. Like I remember thinking about that. And it's like, man, the longer this goes, like, come on, man, let's go.
Right. And, there are some times where it's like, okay, I don't think it's going to be Notre Dame now because I just don't think he clicks really well with Coach Quinn for whatever reason. And then, of course, it changes. And he ends up signing in the class. And boy, was that big. Because he's got a chance to be a really good player. But as you said, Vince, how quickly can he provide enough? He's not going to be a consistent player. Quentin Nelson in 2015 was not a consistent player the way that he was in 2017 from an execution standpoint. But what Q did as a freshman was be really good. He was dominant as a freshman. Can Billy Schrouth be that type of player? Now, I'm not saying he has to be as good as Quentin Nelson was because that's unfair.
That's a high bar. Yeah.
But can he play with the force? And that's going to come down to how quickly he gets comfortable. That's going to be the key, Ryan. How quickly can he get comfortable in the offense, or Vince? How quickly can he get comfortable in the offense to where he knows what to do well enough to say, I'm going to go whoop this guy next to me, right? And that's going to be the key. Because if he can play just good football this year, right, and good football for him is going to mean times when he's dominant, at times when he's, not so much, right? Sure. He's going to miss an assignment or not be sure of what he's doing and maybe not play as hard. But he didn't play as many snaps and games as Blake Fisher, but he got a lot more reps than Blake Fisher did last year, did as a freshman, because he was healthy all fall.
Right.
Where, Blake played half of the Florida State game, all the Oklahoma State games. He got that game experience, but he missed 2.5, 3 months of practice time.
That's huge.
Well, Billy got all that at least.
Right.
Which is good. Now it's about taking his game to the next level. Yeah. And that's going to be the key.
But watching him in the spring, though, Brian, like, it was fun to watch him because
he flashes, man.
Because you can see it. Like, you can see, I hate using the word potential because he's doing it, right?
But like, see the skill.
Yes, you can see the skill. You can see, I'll use the word potential, but you can see the consistent potential that's there because of his size, because of his footwork, and all of those different things. He's going to make assignment mistakes.
Surprisingly athletic. When you look at him, he doesn't look athletic. Like, when you see his body type, you're like, but then he moves and you're like, okay, this guy's athletic, man. This guy can really get after it.
And that's one of the first things you look at when you're looking at an offensive lineman is how well they move their feet. And obviously that's important on the outside for tackles, but it's also important for guards too, because they're doing pass blocking and they're pulling and they're doing all kinds of stuff. His feet are just, it's almost like a ballet, you know what I mean? And it's fun to watch. So him doing one-on-ones, as I was watching, I was like, okay, yeah, he's going to be the left guard. Like, that's all I needed to see. And one-on-ones aren't the most important thing when you're a guard. I get that, because there's a lot of combo blocks. There's a lot of, different things that you're doing inside. But watching him in one-on-ones, it was like, yeah, this he's got the goods. He's got the goods. So it was. I expect him to not look like a redshirt freshman the majority of the time, but there's going to be times where that's going to be the case. Right. So, but he earned that spot at this point on July 11th, as we're talking. He has earned that spot. Now he's going to have to continue to earn it through fall camp and through the season, and he's going to have to get better as the season goes on too.
Right, Vince, because he has earned the right to go into fall camp day one as the first team left guard.
Yes,
it does not ensure that he's going to finish fall camp as the number one left guard, right? Yes. And that's going to be a thing. Is we need to hear that there's no competition there.
Right.
Like, that's what we need to hear in fall camp. Because, like, right now we expect a battle at right guard between, we'll get to this in a minute, but Christophic and Rocco Spindler, maybe even Tosh Baker, some of those kind of guys, Ashton Craig. What we need to hear is that those guys are up for that one spot, right?
Right.
It's
There's
like
four
left guard
spots
is
locked down.
right. We don't want to hear
Yeah.
like, hey, Notre Dame's been putting Rocco at left guard a lot the last couple weeks because Billy's having a tough time, right? And
Right.
like you can't hear that. You need to
Right.
hear that
That
Billy
would be disturbing. Yeah.
built on what he started in the spring.
Right.
As you mentioned, Vince, playing between the two veterans is going to be big for him. But the reality is, here's the danger. If I can only bring back 3 starters, we talked about what the 2 preferences were. But the ideal preference is that it's like center, left guard, left tackle, or center, right guard, right tackle, because then you have one side established as we can go here.
Sure.
The danger that Notre Dame has this year is if the 2 guard positions don't play good football, doesn't matter how good your tackles are, you're not going to have a dominant side.
Sure.
Yeah, Joe Alt may do his job, Blake may do his job, Zeke may do his job, but if the guards are getting their butts whooped, we have no good side. I thought that was an issue in 2021, especially early in the season before they put Kristofic in the lineup. I thought the tackles, like Josh Lugg, played much better in 2021 than people give him credit for. Just when he had a mistake, it was very glaring.
Sure.
But there was no strong side, because both guard positions were a mess for different reasons. And that's another reason why it's very important that Billy play well. Again, when we say play well, we're talking about relative to his experience and age. We're not asking him to play like 2017 Quentin Nelson, but look like redshirt freshman Ronnie Stanley, look like redshirt freshman Quentin Nelson, look like those kind of guys. And that's what you want to see. I mean, even when Q got hurt in 2015, Alex Barr steps in as a redshirt freshman for 2 games and plays good football. And you know, I don't say you didn't miss a beat really, because he stepped in and got the job done. Tommy Kramer, look like, if Billy Schrauth just looks like 2017 Tommy Kramer,
awesome.
They're golden.
The left side is going to be dominant.
Right. They're golden.
Yeah.
So that's it. Again, that's what we're asking for is right there, is be a force in the run game and just don't have bad slip ups in the pass game. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah.
And this is where we're going to really find out if Joe Walt or Joe Rudolph is that dude as the offensive line coach. Like, he's going to have a role in Zeke and Blake taking their games to the next level, but that's also going to come from experience, having been with Coach Easton for a year, but then also the game experience. Getting the guards ready to play is where Joe Rudolph is going to earn his money, and where people are going to say, like, I hate when people say, well, you're just going to forget about the guy who's there. But no, you're going to never forget about Harry Easton. But to where you're like, we're good. Like, we're in good hands. Coach decided to retire. He earned it. We're in good hands. That's going to be the thought process if Joe Rudolph can do it. And it's going to come down to his ability to get those 2 guard positions ready to go.
Absolutely.
And Billy Schrauth, to me, is where I really want to focus, where I'll be focusing early on my attention, because if he can play well, then you have a dominant side, and that is huge.
Right.
For your run.
You can work with that.
Offensive line. Exactly.
You can work with that, and then you can kind of bring along the other side or what have you. Like, if you have one dominant side, you can work with that. That's a great place to start. And if he can, like you said, he's earned the right to be the number 1 guy on the left side going into fall camp. If he can stay there the entirety of fall camp, we're talking a month, right? We're talking a month of practices. If he can stay there and continue to grow and continue to learn and continue to absorb what Joe and Zeke are doing and telling him and all of those things, if he can continue to be on the rise, that's only going to help, and they could develop into that dominant side. And then obviously our focus would shift to the right side and what that looks like at the guard position. So
segue. That was a real, you come right off vacation and just slide right into the smooth segues of moving to right guard. Very well done, my friend.
Hey, I was listening to the pros while I was on the beach. So I was listening to you guys, and it was a lot of fun. But so the right side, that's the side that we don't know about as of this point, right? It's going to be a competition.
And I'll be honest, Vince, I'm actually a little bit more confident that there's going to be good play at right guard. And because with Billy Schrauth, it's the unknown. We saw what he did in high school.
Sure.
We saw what he did in spring ball, but spring ball doesn't equal beating Ohio State and beating USC and beating Clemson and beating NC State and those type of teams, right? It comes down to, but at least I know what the baseline is going to be here, because one of 2 things is going to happen. Andrew Kristofic wins the job, okay? Well, we've seen what an offensive line can look like
Mhm.
with Andrew Kristofic. When
Yep.
we always talk about when Joe Alt stepped into the starting lineup in 2021, that helped calm things down. But him and Andrew Kristofic basically entered the starting lineup around the same time. I think Andrew was like a week ahead of Joe, but they basically, going to that Virginia Tech game was the first time that those two started beside each other, and you saw the play of the offensive line become a lot better
Yeah.
because what we did was you had a side that could play. They
Mhm.
weren't great, but they could go out there and just do their job. And that's exactly what Andrew Kristofic is. He
Mhm.
is a guy that has, I feel like now that he's a fifth year senior, he just kind of he is what he is as a football player. He's not going to get a ton better, and that's okay as long as he doesn't take a step back.
Right.
That's really what it boils down to, because there you of course you'd love to have a guy that just goes out there and dominates people, right? That'd be great. But there's something to be said for a guy that just goes out there and just does his job every snap.
Exactly.
There's something to be
Exactly.
said for that. And when you
Yep.
look at Andrew Kristofic and you talk about what the line looked like, coming out of, when he started, I mean, the last 7 games of the year, as bad as the Notre Dame offensive line was that year at times, the last 7 games of the regular season, they averaged 203.7 yards per game. Right? I mean, if you go back and look at the first 5 games before he stepped into the starting lineup, they never had Vince. They never had more than 132 yards in a game, and that was against Toledo, right? I mean, so we're not even talking about like the funny thing is, for the most part, outside of Cincinnati, the better teams they played, I felt, were in the second half of the year, at least at defensive line wise. And that team went out and Vince, they couldn't move they couldn't run the ball on Toledo, bro.
Yeah.
Like, they had 132 yards against Toledo. They had 3 yards on 32 carries against Wisconsin. They rushed for 84 yards against Cincinnati. They averaged 80.8 yards per game. And then Alt and Kristofic go side by side. And the rest of the year, their lowest output the regular season was 150 yards. And they had 3 games at over 200, another game with 180. So you feel like there's at least a baseline. And
Absolutely.
then if
Yeah.
he gets beat out, it's because somebody else played better.
Right.
If Rocco beats him out, and we'll talk about Rocco in a minute, but like if Rocco beats him out, if they decide Tosh Baker's having a great spring and they just like Tosh is just too good not to play, and they decide they want to put him a guard, if Ashton Craig takes a big jump, and I'm hearing a lot of good things about Ashton Craig, by the way. Harry Houston apparently loved him,
Mhm.
and Joe Rudolph, same. Like
He's on the
they
same
love his
train.
talent, right? Same. So if you're able to get like one of those guys beats him out, you're like, okay, well that means that guy played
Right.
really good football
Yeah,
in
that's
fall
the
camp.
key.
Like
Yeah.
that's the only way you're going to beat out Andrew Kristofic, in my opinion, is if you go out there and play. You're just better.
Yeah.
And then that improves just going to make you that better. So I just feel like with right guard, I don't think right guard has the upside of left guard, because I think Billy Strauss, the most talented player in competition for these spots, in the non-freshman class. But it comes down to, I know who Andrew Kristofic is. And if he gets beat out, then you're feeling pretty good about right guard. The only way that I would say I'm not confident is if something happens to Andrew, like he has an injury, and then he can't play because of an injury, because now you don't know that the guy beat him out. You just know that
Exactly.
he didn't play.
Yeah.
But if Andrew Kristofic is healthy, he's going to be a steady presence at guard, which is good. I'm good with. And that's going to be good having beside Blake Fisher, having that veteran beside Blake Fisher, or somebody's going to beat him out who's dominant, who shows at least stretches of dominance, or is more steady. Like Blake Fisher, I mean, Tosh, let's just say Tosh Baker is just too good not to play. That means Tosh finally started to tap into some of his upside, and he's going to go out there and be even more steady than Andrew Kristofic was. And that's why I have a little bit greater level of confidence that I know what the floor is for the right guard position as opposed to the left guard position.
That's the key. When you and Ryan when you guys are talking about recruits and you talk about floors and ceilings and all of those different things, that's the first thing I think about with Andrew Kristofic, right? I think he's got a high floor. He's not, but his ceiling isn't super high. You know what you're going to get from Andrew Kristofic. You know exactly what you're going to get. And that's not a negative thing. I'm not saying that in a negative way at all.
Right. It's a level of steadiness. And Vince, you
Yes.
know, as an offensive coordinator,
Yes.
I would die to have 5 steady
Oh,
offensive linemen. I can do some
absolutely.
things with the minimum of 5 steady guys, and that's what Clemson was in 16 and 18. Vince, they weren't
Yep.
dominant. They
Yep.
were steady. You knew what you're going to get for those 5 kids. That's what's been so good for Michigan. None of those guys are Joe Walt. None of those guys are Quentin Nelson or Mike McGlinchey or Zach Martin, but they just all do their job every snap. Let's just do their job every snap.
And that's Andrew
important.
Kristofic. I mean, that if I'm an offensive coordinator and I have to choose between 2 guys, right, at one offensive line position at this point, and I'm looking at all the different things. I've got one guy who I know is going to go to the right spot every single time. He's at least going to battle with whoever. He might not be the most physical guy in the world, but he's going to go to his spot. He's going to be there. He's not going to jump off sides. He's going to be steady Eddie. And then I've got another guy who I don't trust a lot, but he's got a lot of physical tools. And, in a one-on-one situation, he's going to dominate a guy, but I don't know if he's always going to be able to get into that one-on-one situation. 9 times out of 10, I'm probably going to take the steady guy, right? So the guy with more talent, right? And there's a couple of guys that we're going to talk about that I think have more talent than Andrew Kristofic. They need to raise their floor. And if they can raise their floor, this is my, like, if we're doing a science experiment, right? Like, this is my known. I know what I'm going to get from Andrew Kristofic. What are these other guys going to bring me? If you can bring me above what I know, then I'm going to go over here. I'm going to go with the more talented guy. That's just the way it's going to be. But if there's too much unsteadiness over here, regardless of the ceiling, if the floor is too low, then I've got to go with the high floor guy. So that's going to be the battle, and that's going to be what Joe Rudolph and Jared Parker and Marcus Freeman, like, that's what they're going to be looking for, I would imagine, during fall camp. Okay, this is what we know. What's going on with these other guys? Can they bring their floor up high enough that they're more consistent than Andrew Kristofic? If that's the case, you go with those guys because they've got more upside. There's no doubt about it, and I'd be fine with that. But that means they beat out Mr. Steady, and that's exciting. Like, that's exciting to me. And if it ends up being Andrew Kristofic, okay, I know what I'm going to get. And you can work with that. You can have your dominant left side, and you can have your pretty stinking good right side. And you can do a lot with that, right? And so what is that floor? What is that ceiling like for these other guys that we're going to talk about? That is the big question going in to fall camp, Brian.
You know what else is going to be important for fall camp is depth.
Yes. Absolutely.
Depth is vitally important. And obviously there's going to be a depth piece in regard to who doesn't win the starting right guard job. Notre Dame needs depth to emerge. They were fortunate last year, Vince, as I think through the season. I mean, you had Jared Patterson miss the first game.
Right.
After that, I don't remember them losing anybody, right? Like, Josh Lugg played the whole season. Blake didn't miss any time. Joe didn't miss any time. Zeke didn't miss any time. They were fortunate. Yeah. 2021 was it was sort of like, okay, we went through, looking at it from Notre Dame standpoint, we went through so much with, having to go down to a 4th left tackle. Yeah. Zeke Correll gets banged up. Jared Patterson gets hurt again, plays through it. Jared Patterson played through a lot of injuries in his Notre Dame career, which props to him for that.
Sure.
And you just had, man, it was just a ton of bad luck on the offensive line. And then in 2020, and then 2020 was a similar situation because, you were kind of steady there for a while. I thought you had the best line in college football. And then Jarrett Patterson goes down. And then Tommy Kramer goes. Actually, it was the other way around. Tommy Kramer went down. Then Jarrett Patterson went down. And then Josh Lugg got hurt, who was then Zeke steps in. He gets hurt. Then Josh Lugg steps in. He gets hurt. But Josh was able to play through it. Josh, talk about
Josh played through a lot too in his career.
Like, we're hard on him. I thought he was a little better than people give him credit for.
Absolutely.
However, I feel like people don't appreciate how much Josh dealt with injury-wise during his career that not only cost him games, but more so the stuff that he played with. That kid played with some major injuries. So did Jared Patterson.
He have a back injury?
Shoulder, knee.
Yeah.
Like,
can you imagine playing offensive line with a back injury?
Yes. a
My
6'7.5" offensive lineman with back issues. So he was a warrior, but he just got sapped of a lot of the power that he had early in
Yeah.
his career.
Yeah.
But you had those injuries in 2020, and you just kind of went through this for a while, for a couple of years. And hopefully Notre Dame's entering a period of time where they'll have some good luck, because some of that stuff is just good luck.
Sure.
And so I look at it, Vince, and you say, when you look at the offensive line, you ask yourself, okay, if there's an injury, if they're healthy, should be pretty good. But what if there's an injury?
Right.
And I think that's still a big question mark. Is depth going to merge? And then it comes down to a guy that I think could be a very important player for Notre Dame this year. And that's Tosh Baker. Tosh is a guy that I had ranked very high, top 100 guy coming out of high school. Loved his upside. The question with him was, could he put on the weight and keep his athleticism? It took a while. He struggled with that a little bit. He's looked better, but the thing is, he's had a hard time. He's so tall that I think he struggles a little bit, Vince, with playing with good pad level consistently. He's going to have to get better about that. But what we heard was he had got a lot better during spring. He really took to Coach Eastand's coaching, and then continued that in the spring with Coach Rudolph, to the point where he played well enough to where, I kind of felt like he was a guy, Vince, that you say, he might be a guy that you sit there and you're watching that right guard battle go, and you're like, but Tosh is better than those guys. Like that's the reality. Tosh is better than those guys. So that's you keep it on him. Now the question is, do you move him to guard, knowing that you've now taken your tackle depth away?
Right.
Or do so that'll be a question mark. But Tosh Baker really continuing to grow is going to be a big part of this, because he can play right tackle, left tackle, and even some guard.
Right.
That he's of the veterans. And then the other one is, can Michael Carmody put on weight and stay healthy? At this point in time, I just have little faith in that happening. But he's going to have to be another guy. Those are the two veterans. Other than that, Vince, the depth is almost exclusively going to come from younger players, or more inexperienced players at this point in time. And we'll have to see who steps into that.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of guys on that second team. When they roll out the second team, it's going to be, okay, who are they going to put on who has emerged on that second team? Because right now it feels like Tosh Baker is kind of the plug and play guy. If somebody goes down, it just feels like Tosh Baker is probably going to be the guy that goes in, outside of center, of course. But, it just feels like,
a tackle for sure.
A tackle for sure, yeah. And he's the primary backup at both tackle spots.
Yeah, I would imagine so. Yeah,
I feel that way going in.
I feel like if it was a situation where, let's say, Blake Fisher goes down for a couple series, they'd put Emil Wagner in, because he's practicing right tackle. But if Blake's going to miss 4 or 5 games, or 2, 3, 4 games,
gotcha,
then they would move Tosh over. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
like you've been
absolutely.
in those situations before, Vince, where you're like, hey, this is our 6th best lineman, but he took no reps at right tackle this week. I'm not going to put him in that situation to get us out of a couple quarters. But hey, we just found out that our starting right tackle is going to be out for 5 weeks.
Now we're going to move him over.
Now we're going to say we're going to move that guy over and get him the practice reps that he needs. That's kind of what I mean by that. I can see
makes perfect sense. Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
But Tosh is the veteran. But then after that, you do have the very talented younger players. Emil Wagner's a very talented young man. Held up much better in the spring game than I thought he was going to be. He was moving people at times, Vince. I was like, okay, this cat's still only 280 pounds, but he's moving people. That's what we were hoping to see. Now, can he maybe add just about 5 to 7 more pounds is all I need to see from Emil in this year to be like, okay, he's
skinny
ready
coming
to go.
in. He was so skinny.
Still looks skinny.
Yeah, he just has a hard time keeping weight on.
When you watch the spring game, you're like, this kid was listed at 278, but he's not getting knocked back.
Yeah,
he's not struggling to anchor. He's moving dudes off the line at times in the run game. You're like, this kid plays with a lot more power, and that's where that 5-star upside comes into play. But can he just gain 5, 7, 8 more pounds this offseason and still move that way? That's going to be the big question. And then, of course, he's got to continue to enhance his technique and all that. But, man, Vince, you saw in the spring game, we saw in the practices, when Emil gets into a nice pass set and he's comfortable with his technique, and you try to run into his chest, he gets those freaking arms out, and they are long, and he has got like bricks at the end of his arms, not hands. I feel like he's got bricks, and he can play with some power.
Mm-hmm.
And I was surprised by that because I knew he had that in high school. I just thought he would need a little bit more weight to be able to move people the way that he did. Now, I think he would need to do it week after week after week, but he doesn't need, we've said this, he doesn't need to be 300 pounds. He just needs to be like 285, 290. Because Ryan and I have talked about this in the show when we've done draft stuff. Like Nicholas Pettit-Frere has a frame that's a little similar to Emil's. He's a little thicker, but they got him at Ohio State up to 310, and he just lost all his athleticism.
Right.
Like you got to be careful. If this kid can play at 290 and move people and anchor and not get knocked back, then be comfortable with him there. Robert Hainsey was only over 300 pounds 1 year of his career. Zach Martin only got to 300 pounds, his senior year, redshirt fifth year, something like that. Zach Martin as a redshirt freshman was 290, and he was a stud from the minute he stepped into the starting lineup. So, when you look at that kind of thing, Vince, I start feeling really good about where Emil is as a player right now. If he can just keep building where he's going. Right. So that's how I feel. Now, other than that, there's some other young guys that we're keeping an eye on. We've got to look at Ashton Craig. Can he continue? He's another guy that needs to put a little bit of weight on, but he got up over to 290 already and had a great spring. Like he put on weight a lot sooner than I thought. Pat Coogan lacks the athleticism you want, but he brings great toughness and intelligence. If you need a guy in the pinch at center or guard, he's another young guy to keep an eye on.
Sure.
Charles Jagasol is going to show up this spring. Sam Pendleton, I thought, showed some nice things in the spring. He really reshaped his body. So there's a lot of talent there, especially on the inside, Vince. I mean, Ty Chan played left tackle during the spring. I hope they move him inside the guard. He looks like a fish out of water at tackle right now. He needs to move inside. But if they move him inside, I think Ty could have a chance to compete. So there's a lot of talent, Vince. A lot of talent. It's just
a lot of untested talent.
Who's going to step up? Right,
yeah,
who's going to step up in fall camp, Vince? That's what I'm looking forward to. That's going to be one of the things I'm going to be watching most during fall camp. Is I'm going to have you guys down there charting a receiver DB one-on-ones. I'm like, I don't care. I'm watching this O-line D-line battle, right? And that's normally not the case,
right?
Because it's very important. Both sides of the ball have young guys that need to step up and establish themselves, and I want to see who does. Yeah, it's going to be a question.
Well, I'm looking at the roster, right? And I'm looking at all the offensive linemen, and you talk about the youth movement and all of these different things, right? And so you start sophomore, senior, sophomore, freshman, junior freshman, senior freshman, junior freshman, sophomore, junior. Like those are their playing years, right? Red shirt and all that stuff. It's a lot of freshman eligibility. You know what I mean? And just a lot of youth that we're talking about. And you're absolutely, who's going to, like, all these guys are right here. Like, who's going to take that step and be like, hey, this guy right here, like, I'm the best of these guys, or a couple of guys are going to have to do that. Like, what does that look like? Because look, those guys aren't necessarily going to play this year, barring injury, right? But there's going to be some openings going into next year. So what is,
That's a good point, Vince. They're jockeying for position to who's going to step into the offseason as that number one spot. Because, Zeke could come back for a sixth year, but he could also say, like, if he's healthy this year, look, I've got 26, hopefully 27 starts in the last 2 years.
Right.
I'm close to 30 for my career. I've been able to stay healthy for a couple of years. How much better am I going to get in year 6?
Right.
I'm going to take my chance to go to the NFL.
If he's a top 5 center in the country.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Am I going to really be able to improve my draft stock in year 6?
Right.
And he may choose to go to the NFL, right? Get your master's and go to the NFL. All good. And he may choose to come back for a 6th year. But if he does go to the NFL, and let's say Joe goes to the NFL, you got to ask yourself a lot of questions. So what if Andrew Kristofic steps in the starting lineup, starts all year, solid football? Do you bring him back for a 6th, or is it time to move on to to get those reps? There's a lot of decisions that are going to be made this offseason.
Yes.
And some of them will be determined by how guys play in those backup spots.
Absolutely.
Who steps into those roles?
Are you going to be recruiting these guys to come back? You know what I mean? Just like you said, right? Are you going to be, look, if you're Joe Rudolph, you want Zeke Crowell to come back. I mean, absolutely. But you're also going to counsel him for what's best for him. You know what I mean? So you could have upwards of, you could have 4 open spots potentially. Let's say Blake Fisher has a great year. He wants to jump. Let's say Joe Alt has a great year. He wants to jump. Zeke Correll doesn't think he can get better draft stock wise. He jumps, and Andrew Kristofic is the right guard. He jumps. I'm saying that's worst case scenario.
I mean, but here's the thing. It's worst case scenario for 2024. It's a
That's
great
best case
scenario
scenario
for 2023.
Yeah,
And that's really
absolutely.
what we're talking about here, right? Is
For
the
sure.
2023. To
For
your
sure.
point, Vince, it's like
Yeah.
if we're having those conversations, like I don't know how much better Zeke can get. Well, we're asking that question because that means he was really good this year.
Absolutely.
Right? That's what that question is centered around.
Right.
Well, you know what, Zeke, you were pretty flipping good this year, man. I don't know how much better film you're going to put on the field next year. Why don't you go ahead and do what you got to do, what's best for you? Because you know my stance on this, Vince. During the season, you are 100% what's best for the team.
Absolutely.
Once the season's over with, your number one priority is let me figure out what's best for me.
Mm-hmm.
Then when you decide whether you're going to be back with the team or not, then you're back to being here's what's best for the team.
Sure.
But in between, winter workouts and the end of your season, that's your time to focus on you and what's best for you. And so if you're in a situation where those three starters and maybe even Christopher are all gone, why are they gone? Most likely it's because this offensive line was phenomenal.
Right.
And so I'll embrace needing to replace all four of those guys.
Absolutely.
If it's because the line is dominant. And that's the whole point, Vince,
Right.
of this particular conversation.
Exactly.
Right?
That shapes the conversation that we're having about, okay, let's say four guys go. What is it looking like? How these guys jockeyed for position behind them to fill those roles? I mean, you're talking about anywhere from 1 to 4 positions being open going into next year, right? So, or 0 to 4. Let's go complete opposite. So you got everybody's going to have eligibility coming back, who no matter who starts. So you're going to have anywhere from 0 spots open going into 24 to 4 spots open going into 24. So the jockeying for position underneath these starters is crucial. It's crucial.
Very important.
And not necessarily for 23, but for moving forward. So it's just fun to think about,
It is, man. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I'm sorry, right. Ryan just texted me something and it made me laugh. So
fair enough.
But look, a couple guys to keep an eye on that I think their improvement this offseason could have the biggest impact the next 2 years beyond the guys we've already talked about as starters. And I want to talk about them as we wrap this up. And we'll have a freshman show as we get closer. So we're not going to talk about the freshmen right now. And you guys want to ask questions about them, we'll do it in the mailbag. But here's a couple guys. And it's obviously we talked about Billy Strouth already.
Yeah.
There's 2 guys that I still consider young guys because of either eligibility or they just flat out are young that could have a big impact on this offensive line, present and future. And they are Rocco Spindler and Ashton Craig. Those are the 2. I want to first talk about Rocco because he's a very interesting kid.
Very.
He put on a lot of weight early, and it wasn't good weight. His feet got slow. And he just looked nothing like the top 150-ish guy, top 100-ish guy that he was coming out of high school. He just couldn't move his feet. He just was dumpy looking. I mean, and I don't know how else to. I don't mean that to be disrespectful. I just don't know other way to describe it. Just didn't look. It just the kind of chubby thighs. Just didn't. And then kind of looked a little better in fall camp, according to you guys, but still slow-footed. I obviously didn't see it. Then the spring, I got a chance to see him, and you're like, at times his feet, but he looked like he was moving a little bit better. He's still big. Agreed. He's still a big kid, but his body didn't look as chunky, like, flabby. He's starting to put better weight on. And when he got his feet right, he would move people. And ended the spring on a very positive note. If Rocco can build, somebody used the word frumpy. I think it's a really good phrase, like frumpy. I don't know how to explain it, but you know it when you see it. And that's
exactly
what Rocco had been. But he's starting to reposition his body. I've seen he's been in some of the workout videos they're putting out. And you're like, okay, Rocco's starting to actually get some definition to his body, right? Because he's also the son of an NFL player. His dad is Mark Spindler, who played in the NFL for a while. I think he was a defensive lineman for the Lions, correct, Vince? I think. But anyway, if Rocco can kind of build on what we saw this spring, at the very least, you're going to be in a situation, if you're Joe Rudolph, where you're like, I've got to play both of them, Andrew Kristofic and Rocco. I got to play both of them. It's similar to what we saw with like Tommy Kramer and Robert Hainsey in 2017. And I'm okay with that. Or best case scenario for him is he beats Andrew Kristofic out. If Rocco Spindler, and this is going to sound like a shot at Andrew Kristofic, it's not, because love Andrew Kristofic as a
Right.
prospect. And we've already said, like, if he's the starter, I just have a level of confidence in the offensive line. I'm just making a point, just kind of big picture. If Rocco fully taps into what he's capable of and what we thought he could be, he's just got the better ceiling as a guard, in my opinion,
Sure.
because he can move people. And if you put 325-pound Rocco Spindler, let's say he loses 5 pounds and he's only 320, reshapes his body, loses 5 pounds. And let's say those 5 pounds go to Blake Fisher and Blake's all of a sudden 315 again, right? You're talking about a big, physical, moving right side of your offensive line. You really do. I mean, and now you've got some ability to where, hey, the left side may be our best side, but when we need a yard, we're going behind Blake and Rocco. You know, and that to me is a situation where that could really help solidify things, not just this year, but now you have at least 2 starters coming back in 2024.
Right.
So present and future. That's my thoughts on what Rocco could do if he can have an improvement.
He's the prime example of what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about Steady Eddie, Kristofic, and then the guy with the higher ceiling, but we just don't know what the floor is. Rocco Spindler fits that category perfectly. He's got a higher ceiling than Andrew Kristofic. That's just facts. I mean, he's got more talent. He's a bigger body. He's stronger. Those are just facts.
And he complements Blake. I mean, him and Blake Fisher would then have very similar skill sets at that point in time in the run game.
They're grinders. They're meat grinders, man. Like the road graders, or whatever synonym or whatever comparison you want to make, right? But that he is exactly who I was thinking of when I was making that comparison. We just don't know what the floor is for Rocco Spindler right now. His biggest priority going into fall camp is raising his floor. If he can get his floor up, he's your starter at right guard. But that's the big question mark. Can he be the consistent guy that he needs to be? Because the upside is so good, but he needs to raise that floor. That's what we don't know. And you make a good point about him kind of reshaping his body a little bit, because he was looking frumpy, man. And it was disappointing because when he signed, I remember when he signed or when he committed to Notre Dame, I was like, man, he has the potential to be, the next great guard at Notre Dame. I mean, he could be that guy, right? And then it was very disappointing because it was like he almost ate himself out of the position. It felt like he just got too big.
I don't know. I don't know that I would say that Vince. That could have been it, but sometimes kids just get into nutrition programs and their body just doesn't have a great It could have just been he was out eating large pizzas at night. I don't want to
put that on.
You know what I mean?
I don't know.
Like,
that
I get where you're coming from,
right.
But sometimes, like, this kid starts. Maybe he had an injury that cost him a month, and because he's already a naturally big kid anyway, he put some weight on that he hasn't been able to get off. But whatever the end result is, a lot of bad weight.
It affected his feet. It affected his movement, and he just looked like a big traffic cone who was guys were going around him, and he just wasn't able to move. He has reshaped some things, and I give a lot of credit to him, which is the direction I wanted to go here. I give a lot of credit to him for just being like, it's just not going to happen for me here. Right. He went back to work.
Yes, because he could have transferred so quickly. Vince.
Oh, absolutely. He was a forgotten man there for a little while at the guard position. He was
not from the fans. Redshirt freshman, right?
Not from the fans.
Yeah,
but like,
some of them.
But he was a forgotten guy, and he could have cut bait. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
But he didn't. He went back into the lab, and he got himself back to where he's now competing for a starting position. What's that floor going to be? That's the big question. And if it's up, if he brings that floor up, man, that right side is going to be a lot of fun to watch.
Well, somebody in the chat just said, Mr. 2.0 just said this, Vince, and it fits along. Imagine Rocco and Billy at their full potential on the same line with Joe Walton. I mean, that's the whole point, right? I mean, that's the thing that gets you a little bit excited. There's a cautious optimism about just how good this line can be. And when we talk about full potential, we're talking about full potential for this stage of their careers. We're not talking about Billy Schrouf becomes the best he'll ever be as a redshirt freshman, or it's the potential, their full potential for right now, right? Quentin Nelson in 2015 reached his full potential as a redshirt freshman. He was a better player in 2017, right? But that was about as good as he could have been in 2015, and even lost 2 games to an injury and came back and was still pretty darn good. That's the point. Is their full potential for who they are now. then yeah, and now we go into 2024 with, okay, there's an establishment there.
Yes.
Right. And then if Zeke decides to come back for a
Then
6 year, you're like,
you've got your center
right,
guard tackle
right.
that we just talked about all coming back.
But if Zeke doesn't come back, that's why it's important that Ashton Craig have a really good season.
Right.
And I would love to see this team just whoop some people this year to where Ashton gets 100, 70, 80 snaps, and Pat Coogan gets some snaps, and Tosh gets a bunch of snaps, and you get the freshmen into some games because you're just blowing people out. You know what I mean?
Right.
But Ashton Craig is a guy that I loved coming out of high school, Vince. And, we've talked about this. When Joe Alt committed to Notre Dame, I said, so this is a great pickup. I was very hard on Jeff Quinn about a lot of things, but I loved that pickup. And that was not a situation where they missed on some dude and just stumbled onto Joe Alt. Like, there were still big time tackles on the board. They took a flyer on Joe Alt, and it was smart and
working out okay.
Right. And the point that you and I talked about at the time was, give me a kid like that every year. A kid who's 250, 260, maybe doesn't have the size right now, but this kid's really long and athletic, has some natural power, and give me that guy every year. This past year was Joe Otting, right? I mean, that was the guy this past year. I love that kid. I know you love that kid. Ryan loves that kid. Ryan might love him more than any of us. And that's saying a lot because we both like him a lot.
Right.
But give me that kid every year. And I think Notre Dame's done very well to find those guys. And Ashton Craig was that version.
Was that kid in 22. Yeah.
And so I think when he committed, I had him as a 3.5-star kid with 4.5-star upside. And then he put on about 15 pounds as a senior, got up to like 270, 275, had a great senior year, earned a top 250 grade. So by the time he was done, he was a top 250 caliber player. And I think you could have made a case, if he was even about 10 or 50 pounds heavier, that he's a borderline top 100. I mean, that's the upside that Ashton Craig showed. He's
his
an
growth,
athletic kid.
His growth, and I'm not talking physically, but his growth from a player standpoint. Like, Notre Dame did a great job of getting on him his junior year.
Yes.
And he was kind of that,
before
like,
he blew up.
Remember when he committed, everybody was like, who's this kid from Indiana, the small school in Indiana? Like, nobody really ever heard of him.
I thought that when I heard that they were going to offer him, because I hadn't seen the film yet.
Exactly. And then he committed, and it's like, okay, well, whatever. But then his senior year, he blew up. He blew up. And it has worked out well for Notre Dame. So I agree with you.
But I loved his potential, Vince. I mean, just from day one, we loved the potential. And this is what we said, is like, look, I know it's easy to get obsessed with rankings, but like, this is the kind of offensive lineman that in 2-3 years ends up becoming a dude for Notre Dame. And that's what he brings to the table. I mean, look, Ashton Craig has a chance to be a really, really good player for Notre Dame. And the question is he going to be able to show that now? Right. And is it going to be, is he going to be able to move the needle and, at certain positions? Is he going to be a center guard? Those are all still questions, but there's talent there. Vince, I'm going to read the last paragraph of the Class Impact article I wrote the day he committed to Notre Dame. I said, if you're someone who is obsessed with star ranking, this is a player that won't move the needle much. But if you're a film watcher, an evaluator, and someone who looks more at projection and upside than star ranking, this is a pickup that adds value to the Notre Dame 2022 recruiting class. But what you saw from him was athleticism.
Yep.
Right. And you saw strength. And this is something we talked about on the show, in the article as well. I said the Lawrenceburg standout shows impressive quickness off the ball, both offensively and on defense. Despite his lack of girth, on film, he does show long arms and strong hands, and that combination of strength and quickness should allow him to thrive inside. And, the question was, could he play center guard? And that's still the question for Notre Dame. And it's more of a question now, Vince, from the standpoint of he proved that he can do both.
Right.
So there's a confidence that Notre Dame is like, we would play him wherever the need was greater.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so even though we talk about Kristofic and Rocco at guard, don't be shocked if at times you start hearing Ashton Craig's name mentioned as someone who could maybe slide over there in battle if those guys aren't getting the job done. I think what the staff would ideally like to do is leave him where he is at center,
right,
and then groom to be the next guy. But once he's comfortable at center, then move him. That may happen sooner than expected.
Right.
Or it could just be a thing where this kid's too good for us not to play. And so, we got to move him to guard. And that's where Pat Coogan's important, because if you move Ashton off a center, Pat Coogan can take over that number 2 center spot and be a tough, smart, physical kid. He doesn't move his feet real well, but he's a big, strong, physical kid that will battle and is really smart. So there's value there. And you also have Joe Otting who can play center. So you have some flexibility now because of landing Joe Otting, that you don't have to keep Ashton Craig at center if there's a greater need somewhere else.
Right. It's that whole best 5 on the field situation, right? I mean,
and he brings that too.
Right.
But even if he doesn't start, Ashton puts you in a situation where you go into the offseason, if Zeke decides to go pro, where you say, man, Zeke was really good last year and a half, really. Zeke was really good. But I think we're going to be okay, right? Because this kid's got a lot of potential too.
Sure.
And this is also where a guy like Zeke Correll can leave his legacy at Notre Dame as well. Is from what I've been told, Zeke's a great leader. And he strikes me as the kind of kid that he's going to take whoever the heir apparent is, whether it's after this season or after next season, and groom that kid along to make sure he's ready to step right in. That's the kind of kid that I think Zeke Correll is. And so as long as he's receptive to that, I think Ashton Craig could be that guy. But he's the other young player that I have my eye on that could make some serious noise in fall camp, Vince, for the Notre Dame offensive line of the non-freshmen, right? Because we always get excited about the freshmen, right?
Of course.
And we kind of already written off the redshirt freshman class and all that kind of stuff. But Rocco, and we already talked about Emil at tackle, but I'm talking inside. Those are the 2 guys inside that can be that guy. And I got to feel that, outside Emil Wagner, it's a big year for him too.
Mm-hmm.
Because you say, well, let's say Joe Walt goes pro and Blake says, I'm coming back, and then you're going to move Blake to left tackle. Now, all of a sudden, you're in a situation where Emil and Tosh Baker are going to battle for that starting right tackle job. That he needs to put himself in position where it's like, hey, I this is my job, right? Yeah, you can move Tosh over here, but this is my job. And then, obviously, Tosh will try to do the same thing on his end. But if you're in a situation where they both leave, which is great for 2023. Okay, Tosh can start at one side and Emil at the other, and you feel like, okay, they're inexperienced, but after Texas A&M, the schedule's pretty favorable for the next month and a half that they can get comfortable, right?
Right, absolutely.
But you start feeling that way now, right? And that's what, to me, I'm not worried about Emil Wagner earning a starting job, but I want to see growth from Emil Wagner. To where A, if somebody goes down, he can step in and handle his job, but B, that he can put himself in position that next year in 2024,
there's going to be a legit battle for that spot.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Whether Blake slides over to left and he's stepping into right, or if Blake and Joe both leave, either way.
Yeah.
So again, Vince, there's a lot of talent. The question is, how much will the talent grow this year? And I don't know how many people care about that, but for me, that's one of the most intriguing storylines of this.
I care.
Of fall camp for me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, no doubt.
You ready for our last 3 segments, Vince? The fun part of
these
what
are
we
fun.
do?
Yeah, these are fun. Let's do this. So the first one is the confidence. Like, so I might have this a little off since I haven't done this with you in a little bit, but it's your confidence level in the room.
Yeah, just overall, what's our confidence level in the team? What's the thing we have the greatest confidence in as well? Like, kind of looking at it from that angle. My confidence level right now is an 8, and that is, Vince, that I feel like this is going to be a good offensive line.
Right.
This is going to be a top 10 offensive line, and that's good enough to have a really good offense, right? There's no doubt. My question is this the kind of offensive line? I think the question still remains, Vince, is this the kind of offensive line that can go into Ohio State, go into Clemson, go into USC, and dominate those matchups? Because here's the reality. You feel good about this offensive line playing well against Clemson because we just saw it.
Right.
And Clemson lost their 2 best defensive linemen. You don't have that same Ohio State is still show me, because when you pop on the film of last year's Notre Dame Clemson game, you see Notre Dame whooping Clemson's butt.
Mm-hmm.
When you pop on the film of Ohio State Notre Dame last year, you see the Ohio State front 7 and Jim Knowles whooping Notre Dame's butt. That's just a fact. It's not debatable. Notre Dame lost that battle. Did they get dominated? No, they didn't get dominated, but they got their butts whooped, if that makes sense, right? Like, they couldn't make the plays they needed to make. Every time there was a big stop that Ohio State needed to make, they made the play. Whether it was a defensive line, was a Mike Hall or Tommy Eichenberg coming on a blitz, or one of the ends setting the edge effectively, they outplayed Notre Dame start to finish. And Notre Dame's going to have to play better in that matchup. So there's still a lot for this unit to prove, but I feel like this team is going to be a really good. If you're one of the 10 best in the country at your position group, Vince, you're pretty darn good.
Yeah.
But there's a difference between being the 8th best line, the 3rd best line, or the best line. That's the question. And that's where my confidence level is more of a, yeah, with that, I need to see it.
Sure.
Is the potential there? Yes. But for me, it comes down to what I can say confidently right now is that this is going to be, without a doubt, one of the 10 best offensive lines of college football. Where I'm not confident is where within that top 10 are they going to rank?
Yeah, I feel like the offensive line as a whole kind of mimics the microcosm of the right guard position. So, and here's what I mean by that. I think this offensive line has a very high floor. I think they have a very, very high floor. I don't know what their ceiling is. I think their ceiling is yet to be determined. And so that puts me at like an 8.5 out of 10 confidence level on who this offensive line is going to be. Because number one, I don't know who the right guard is going to be. So where does that ceiling fall? Well, how does, Billy Schrow fit in with Joe Ald and Zeke Correll? And does, Fisher take that next? All the things that we just talked about, all the questions that we have going in about this offensive line. Like what? But I still feel like with all of those questions, it's a very high floor, which I agree with you. And I will echo what you're saying. Top 10, no doubt. Like the floor is top 10. That's the floor for this offensive line, even with 2 brand new starters. But what's the ceiling going to be? I think it can be very high. I think the ceiling for this group can be very high. I think they can work really, really well together. The thought of Rocco and Blake on the same side, being that road grader side, the thought of an All-American and Joe Ald and the ceiling,
the athletic
Billy
side.
Schrow. Yeah, like all of those things are very exciting to me. I see a very high ceiling. But they got to prove it. I mean, we've got to see it, and that's going to be the proof in the put. And then you just throw that curveball in of a new offensive line coach as well, right?
Would you say, Vince, that the floor is pretty high as well? Like, do you agree with me that this is going to be a top 10 line? I mean, barring injury and just some stuff like Joe Rudolph just not being a good coach.
The floor is super high on this.
Yeah. So then it's okay, but can they reach their ceiling? Correct. So that's what you're saying. Like, I expect this to be a pretty good offensive line.
Yeah.
But yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, I gotcha. To answer a quick question from the chat. So our guy Archer was talking about the 2012 Bama line, and he said that line had 2 first-rounders, a second-rounder, and a fourth-rounder, and an undrafted free agent. And I'm like, bro, you're in a Notre Dame chat. Like, that's nothing. Notre Dame's 2015 offensive line had 3 first-round picks, a second-rounder, and I said a guy that retired from football, because Steve Elmer would have been a 4th or 5th-round pick if he doesn't retire. Steve Elmer was the guy. That was the guy we're talking about. Steve Elmer. So Quentin Nelson, Ronnie Stanley, Mike McGlinchey, all top 10 picks. Nick Martin was the second-round pick, and then Steve Elmer was the guy that retired. I just want to make sure we're clear on that, of the conversation going on in the chat about it. So that's our confidence picks, Vince. What are the things as you look into this season and you project this offensive line of kind of what we know right now? What would you say, Vince, are the things that you view as the biggest questions? It can be personnel, it can be potential, it can be whatever. What would you say are probably your 2 biggest questions that the answer to will have the biggest impact on whether this is just an 8th or 9th or 10th line, or maybe disappoints, or this team reaches its potential? What are the things that and it's kind of the opposite of the last one. What are the questions you have that you say they could hold this unit back a little bit, but if they get answered, this offensive line is going to be really good? So
the first one for me is the Joe Rudolph influence. And that has a multitude of answers to it. But that's my biggest question. What is the Joe Rudolph influence? I need to see that. Like, are they going to adapt like a tough, like, are they going to be like his personality? Are they going to be just technically sound? Like, what is his influence on this offensive line? That's a question mark for me.
In games, not practice.
In games, right. Absolutely. Yep. And then the next one is the right guard position. And here's why I say that. Because if you have Andrew Kristofic, you've got a good right side. You've got a steady right side.
Right.
You've got a right side that can do work, and they'll be good. Right. High floor. If it's a Rocco Spindler right side and he steps into that right guard spot, the ceiling just got higher, and that becomes a potentially dominant right side.
Or Ashton Craig, I would also throw him in there.
And that's fair. That's totally fair. So what are the answers at right guard? because the
Yeah.
answers at right guard will tell me what kind of an offensive line this is going to be as a whole. So those are my two biggest questions about the line.
Yeah, I'm pretty much with you on those, Vince. I think, how good is Joe Rudolph going to be is a big question mark that we can't possibly know answers to until we get into the games.
Right.
And then even then, there's still going to be questions down the road of, okay, was he building on what Harry did? Or, because like I remember you and I talking about the 2021 season. And the point you and I made was on 2019 and 2021, the 2019-2020, the offensive line was still dominated by guys that started their careers playing for Harry Hiestand, that played for him at least for a year.
Yep.
Aaron Banks was recruited.
I remember this show specifically that you're going to reference.
The 2021 season was the first year that it was the opposite. There was only one guy that was recruited by and played under Coach Hiestand. That was Josh Lugg. That was it. And so you weren't going to have that Harry Hiestand influence anymore. What was it going to look like? And it struggled mightily. Well, now you're in a situation where, Joe Rudolph needs to establish it in year one and then build on it. But that's an unknowable that we won't know till down the road. But I do feel like the difference here, however, is Harry Hiestand was only here for a year this second time.
Right.
So there's a little bit of he'll get credit for if this offensive line is really good, and he should, because he turned the tide. But I feel like Joe Rudolph is going to have a lot more of a say in the success than, let's say, Jeff Quinn did in 2018 when he took over for Coach Hiestand, because that was that line was a bunch of dudes that had played a bunch of football for Coach Hiestand. So that's kind of where I look at it, is I do feel like he's going to have, if this line's really good, I'm going to be more confident that it's going to be sustained moving forward, because the 2018 offensive line at Notre Dame was pretty good. And that was, and we thought it was being coached by a guy that wasn't a great coach. So, but I feel like because of the circumstances, I'll feel a little bit more confident that coaches. But the other part too is the physicality. If the physicality's there, that'll make me feel better. That's really the big question for me is this going to be, I think Joe Rudolph is going to have this line knowing what to do. I'm confident in that. No doubt about that. The question for me probably, Vince, now that I'm kind of talking through, I just go on these
I know.
It just hits me like, okay, I think I know where I'm going with this. I think what it comes down to, my question really is, I have no doubt he's going to get him. The technique's going to be solid at the very least. They're going to know what to do, because Wisconsin's run games were actually relatively complex. They're not simple. They were complex. So I think he can teach that stuff. The question is, can he teach them to be brutes? Can he get them to play with force, with physicality, with that nastiness, with that drive, with that attitude? I don't want to just beat you.
Yeah.
I want to humiliate you. Like there's this people would talk, there's this reactions to like Larry Bird and these like highlights of Larry Bird. And there was one where he was just like, asking Craig Elo, like, is your mom watching this game? You know what I mean? He just tried to humiliate people. Like, you take your soul. Told a guy that you should have stayed in preaching. Just was trying to it just wasn't enough to beat you. I had to take your spirit. And that's kind of how I felt like Coach Hiestand's best lines were. They didn't just want to beat you. They wanted to take away your willingness to fight anymore. Like, isn't that what war is, right? Like victory in war is when the opponent no longer has the ability or willingness to keep fighting. Right. And that's kind of on a non-fatal standpoint. That's kind of what you're looking for here. Is that's when you've whipped your opponent. Do they have that? We don't know. Can he get that out of them? I don't know. That to me is probably my biggest question. And personnel wise, it's just like, it's along the same lines. It's yes, the guards and all that. That's very important. My big one is, can Blake Fisher take that big jump?
Yeah.
That's my big question. Because I feel like if Blake takes the big jump, this team is going to be really good. Because he can then bring along the right guard. You know what I'm saying, Vince? Like, if Blake is like, I expect, part of the reason I'm not worried about Billy as much is because he's right in between Joe and Zeke.
Right.
Where the right guard is kind of like, okay, can Blake have that same influence? It was unfair to ask him to do that last year because he was a redshirt freshman who had 2 career games, a game and a half under his belt, and missed a whole season of practice. Well, that's not the case anymore. He's now a veteran. And so can he have that carry that guy forward with him, impact on the right guard position. And if he's the guy that I think he's going to be, or can be anyway, he can have that impact. So that's probably my second biggest question that I don't know the answer to yet with Blake. And if it's answered positively, then this offensive line is going to be exceptional. Because if you really think about those great lines that Notre Dame had, 15, 17, they were pretty darn good at both tackle spots. Even the 17 line was like, who was your tackle going to be? It was either Hainsey or Kramer, but they were very good. They were very good players. 18, you look at it. You had Eichenberg and Hainsey. You had them for the next 3 years. 2020, those guys were both 3- and 4-year starters by that point in time. And you're just like, yeah, you're pretty locked in at tackle. And so can he have that influence, Vince? That's a good question. Yeah. And if he does, this team's going to be really flipping good. Really flipping good. So let's make some bold predictions, Vince. Give me 2 bold predictions for the Notre Dame offensive line. And the bold prediction is not that Joe Ralt is a unanimous All-American. That's not a bold prediction, okay? So I'm just going to take that one off the table right now.
That's funny.
Give me a real bold prediction.
Yeah. All right. So my first one, and I don't know how bold this is. I always have trouble with this. And I know, and we've got to caution the chat, obviously, that our bold predictions, they're bold for a reason, right? We're not
they're meant to be fun. Right.
Correct.
Like best case scenario, maybe even beyond type of situations. They're meant to be the fun part of the breakdown.
And that's where so for my first one, I'm going with a team stat. And I'm gonna say that Notre Dame averages 210 yards on the ground per game. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, I think obviously the offensive line is going to be really, really good. Number two, I think they've got a pretty darn good stable of backs behind them. Okay. And it's a bold prediction overall because of who the quarterback is, right? I mean, people think they're going to be slinging the ball all over the place and doing all these different things. This is still Marcus Freeman. He's still going to have his thumbprint on this team. They're still going to run the ball, and it's still going to be effective. I also think that there's going to be some games where they're going to be well ahead and they're going to run the ball and they're going to break a few of those runs. And because you're going to see some of these backs who haven't gotten a lot of touches, they're going to get some touches behind this offensive line and they're going to break it and they're going to go and they're going to be able to accumulate some of those yards on the ground, maybe some late in the game, that kind of a thing. This is still going to be a running football team. I'm not saying that's all they're going to do, but I think they're going to run the ball very effectively. And I think some of these blowouts, they're going to get an opportunity to kind of run up that rushing total as well. So I was going to say 200. I upped it to 210. Reason being, if they average 200 yards, and I'm basing this on last year. Okay. Right. If they're 200 yards, they're top 24. Okay. If they're 210, they're top 15. In rush yards.
Well, and you also have to keep in mind there's going to be fewer opportunities most likely this year because of slightly shorter games.
Sure, that is a very good point. Yeah, that I always forget about that part with the new rule change and all of that stuff. Right. But so it's a bold prediction, 210 on the ground.
Yeah, especially Vince, because I do think this team is going to be more balanced even than you do. It would seem, because yes, they're going to still be a team that needs, like I would say, is I wouldn't necessarily, I think they're going to be a running football team. What I'm going to say is they're still a team that puts a great value on being able to run the football whenever they want to run the football.
Yeah,
there may be times they run for $150 because they run 10 RPOs and they're hitting big play action shots and the opportunities aren't there. So to me, 210 yards to me would be a pretty good stat line for me. My bold prediction statistically is that they're going to average 5.5 yards per carry or more. Now that puts them in the top 8 or 9 based on last year. And the reason I focus more on that number is in the first couple years of the new rule change, I'm going to put a lot more emphasis on the average yards per play than I do yards per game. Because especially for the first half of the season, I'm not going to really know what a good yard per game average is. Because
that's true.
You're the teams that you're playing, there's all types of circumstances that we go into. But I do know that no matter how many plays you run, whether it's 30 or 90, I do know what a good yard per carry or yard per attempt average looks like. And so if bold prediction, so anytime you're predicting a top 10 statistic, that's pretty good. The Notre Dame's 2020 offensive line, as good as it was, averaged 5.02 yards per carry. Notre Dame's 2017 offensive line, which was elite, averaged 6.3 yards per carry. And then the 15 offensive line, which is also still pretty good, was 5.6. So a part of me wants to go even higher and go above 5.5, but 5.5 gets you in the top 10 most years. And so I'm actually going to go for that. And I think also when you look at their 15 and 17 offensive lines, they had quarterbacks in both years that ran for a lot of yards. I mean, in 2015, Deshaun Kaiser ran for 520 yards and averaged 3.9 yards per carry. In 2017, Brandon Wimbush ran for 800 yards and averaged 5.7 yards per carry. If you put a more traditional quarterback number on there, I think it looks a lot different. And so even though I think Sam Hartman can run and he can move, Ian Book averaged 4.2 yards per carry, ran for 485 yards. I don't expect Sam Hartman to do that. Even 2 years ago in 2021, when Sam Hartman had 11 rushing touchdowns, he had 363 yards and only averaged 3.1 yards per carry.
He'll be effective in the red zone running the ball, I have a feeling.
Moving the chains, picking up some first downs. But, this past year, Sam Hartman ran for 129 yards and 1.3 yards per carry. Now, part of that was it seemed like there was a little bit more of an unwillingness on Wake Forest to have him out there running. And I don't know if maybe part of that was the injury, the heart thing that he dealt with in the preseason. I don't know if it was that, if it was the offensive line wasn't as good. There was a lot of factors into that. I could see him being more of a 250 to 300 yard guy at the most, average around 3 to 3.5 carry. That's a far cry from Brandon Wimbush averaging, 5.7. Yeah. Right. So that's why the Notre Dame offensive line in 2017 averaged 6, 5. Excuse me, I just looked at Wake Forest numbers. Like, no, they did a lot better than that. No, Wake Forest in 2017 was 4 point something. But that's why Notre Dame averaged 6.4 yards per carry in 2017, is because you had a quarterback that averaged 5.7 yards per carry, right? And so I look at that and I say minimum 5.5. And if anything beyond that, and this offense is really cooking. And if they can get up to 6, then this run game is going to be really nasty. Absolutely. It's going to be really nasty. And to me, that's going to matter a little bit more to me than total yards. Because they could go out there and run for 160 yards and average 6.2 yards per carry. And you're like, that's a pretty darn good day of work. And you say, well, you only ran for 160 yards. Yeah, but it's because they do more RPOs now, and 10 called run plays were pulls because the defense was overloading the box or whatever the case may be, right? So you have to look into those type of things and
for sure,
evaluating it for sure. But just pure rushing yards, that's kind of where I'm at. That's my bold prediction. Do you have a second bold prediction, Vince, this year?
I'm getting back on the Zeke Correll bandwagon.
Okay.
And I think he's going to end the season as a top 3 center in the country.
Okay.
So I think he's going to play really well. I think he's going to take to this leadership role. He's going to, I just think he's, at the end of the day, he's going to be the leader of this offensive line. And that's what I want from my center. I think he's going to be the leader of this offensive line. I think that is going to translate in his play, because he's going to play with a tremendous amount of confidence. Another year in the weight room is going to make him even stronger. And I don't think we're going to see as many getting beat off the snap as many times as it happened last year. Now, again, he recovered, and those were great. That was awesome. I just don't think we're going to see that as much this year.
Right.
And so I think he takes his game to another level. And if he's top 8 right now, I think he'll be top 3.
So I'm gonna make my bold prediction based on what you just said.
Ooh.
If your bold prediction is correct, then here's my bold prediction, and that is that Notre Dame wins the Joe Moore Award.
Oh,
if
nice.
Zeke Correll is a top 3 national center, which means he's making second, third team All-American type of lists, right?
Yep.
And I say second team because not everyone's going to view you as number 3. If you're that good, someone may view you as number 2, just like we saw last year with Joe Alt being first and second, right? So you're talking about a guy making second and third team All-American honors on top of what we're expecting from the tackles. That's a Joe Moore award-winning offensive line. And I think their efficiency numbers are going to be exceptional. And we'll get into some of the reasons why as we get into, somebody said one of the questions was, if Notre Dame averages 6 yards a carry, what does that mean for Sam Hartman in the passing attack? Well, my whole thing is, I think the passing attack is going to be a big part of the reason that they average 6 yards a carry, right? You know what I mean? Like, that's going to be a big factor in Why?
Sure.
Because the passing attack is really good. The RPO game is good. They're efficient. They're getting in a lot of 2nd and 2s,
I hope
and 1s.
I hope that
right, stuff like
defenses
that.
are in a bind. Like, okay, do we load up to stop the run? Do we sit back to stop the pass? And then Notre
Right.
Dame does their RPO thing and they take whatever
Right.
the defense gives them. Like,
Yeah,
that's
or you've got to
ideal.
keep that overhang out a little bit, and I'm just
Right.
going to crush you with Aldrich Estime and my other
Exactly.
backs. Right, those are, and you hopefully get a few more. And this the other thing too is, like, if you look at last year's yards per rush attempt, Vince, it was actually impressive when you consider they just weren't a team that had a lot of big runs. I mean, Aldrich Estime was at 5.9 yards per carry. Logan Diggs was at 4.98 yards per carry. That means your starters were your two main guys were around 5.5 yards a carry, right? I mean, that's I'm doing the math now, so it's 321 carries. Yeah, they're at 5.4 yards per carry, right? And your quarterback averaged 2.3 yards per carry, and your other one averaged 3.4. So you were a little under 3.0 yards per carry. Then you had minus 23 yards on 13 plays from your team. So you were a 4.8, 4.9, 5 yards per carry team when you ran the football last year, for the most part. So, I think 5.5 to me, if they get to 5.5, 6, man, that's going to be one heck of an offense. That's going to be one heck of a. It really is.
We've been talking about this for a while, and we saw glimpses of it in the spring. I mean, I just, if you're a fan of offensive football, I feel like this season is going to be the season for you. And I use you metaphorically, right? I just think you're going to see some points scored. You're going to see some big plays. You're going to see Notre Dame go over the top. You're going to see some bruising running. I mean, if you're a fan of offense, you're going to enjoy this season. If you're a Notre Dame fan, I firmly believe that. And we can, we're talking about the various question marks of the different position groups and all of those things. And those are all legit things. But if you're an offensive coach, you like where you are with Notre Dame right now, overall. And they're going to put up points, man. They're going to score and they're going to put up points. And it's going to be, I'm really going to enjoy watching this team. You know what I mean? Going from seasons where it's like, oh my gosh, the offense just can't even move the football. Like I just don't see that being the case. I think that's going to be a case on Friday nights with my kids' team. But I don't think that's going to be the case on Saturdays when I'm watching Notre Dame.
I don't know if you've checked your email today, Vince, but you did get approved for credential this year, so you'll be able to watch it from the stadium. So that'll be good. No more you and I sitting beside each other in the stadium in Langdon 2021.
Yeah, right.
So in the stands, yeah, it'll be nice. But yeah. So anyway, Vince, that's going to kind of do it for this part of the show. We're going to have a mailbag next, but before we go, Vince, what do people need to do, man? Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, the notification bell, share this podcast. We've had a ton of signups. So if you all remember, several months, about 7-8 months ago, we made a decision to go away from PayPal. We're not using PayPal anymore. And so that basically kind of canceled over 500 members. And so our numbers took a big step back. We are already way past where we were when we made that decision. So we want to thank you all for that. I was actually crunching all those numbers last night. We've had over half the people that did that still have not seen their subscriptions expire, so they can't re-sign. And we've probably had, Vince, of the annual memberships, we've had about an over 90% retention rate of the people whose annual memberships expired have re-signed back up the new platform. So our numbers have really taken a big jump. So we're really happy about that, and that continues to grow. And so I want to thank you all for that. But if you haven't signed up,
by the way,
sign up, man. If you have not done so already, sign up for those, and you can find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. It is mailbag time, Vince.
And I've had the comments hidden the whole time, so I don't know
Vince
what's
gets
coming.
so distracted when he just like Ryan's that way too, man. It's just like, what's going on in the chat? Like, hey guys, we're talking here. We're talking here. So we got a bunch of them, man. So let's get rocking and rolling, Vince.
Let's do it. Super chat from Rob Osgood. Thanks, Rob. Really appreciate it. He goes, I know it was talked about when JR was hired, Joe Rudolph, but I can't remember. So what do you think the difference in the O-line will be from a Harry Hiestand line last year to this year under Joe Rudolph? Coaching styles, technique, etc.
Well, Joe Rudolph, while intense, is not as intense as Coach Hiestand. I'm hoping that's the only difference. And that's in practice. If you ever watch Coach Hiestand during games, he was not nearly as intense. I mean, he would get on him when they needed to get on him on the sideline, but he was much calmer on Saturdays, unless he felt the offensive line needed a butt chewing because they weren't giving it. But if you were playing hard, I mean, it was correction, it was teaching, it was what do we got to do, what are you seeing? So, but in practice, it'll be a little bit different. But other than that, Rob, I'd hope that we don't see a lot of difference. And that's kind of gets back to, and now Rob put this question in before the show started.
Gotcha.
So, which we appreciate. And thank you for your super chat, Rob. But that's kind of like the answer to your question is kind of what we were talking about early in the show when we were discussing the interview process, where one of the things that really impressed the players is that the most importance to him, right, were very almost identical to what Kerry Heastand's most importance were. And if you look across the board with great offensive line coaches, they'll all run different schemes. Some guys are pin and pull guys, some guys are man schemes, some guys are zone guys, but there's things that they all believe in, right? It's great pad level. It's about hand play, good footwork, assignment correctness, and then playing with some force, being physical at the point of attack. Those are all things that kind of are true of all great offensive lines, regardless of what your specific scheme is.
Yeah.
And so that comes from the line coaches. Now, some coach may have run this drill, another coach runs this drill, but at the end of the day, the drills are designed towards getting your guys to come off the ball with nice flat backs, explode their hips into contact, get their hands and feet working together, drive their feet through contact, play with great angles, and finish. Be great finishers. One of the biggest complaints we had about Jeff Quinn's offensive line is they were catchers. Yeah. They just kind of come off and absorb contact and hang on. Then that's why you weren't running the ball. With Coach Heastand and with the great O-line coaches, even if you look like a guy like Bill Bedenbaugh and Harry Heastand, right, the Oklahoma coach, they had some great O-lines over the years. Their scheme was 180 degrees different than Notre Dame's. Notre Dame under Harry Heastand the first time, they were inside-outside zone, and they'd run like a buck sweep a little bit, some counter and a little bit of G scheme. They weren't a whole lot of, they ran a buck sweep a bunch in 2017, which is a pin and pull concept, but they were inside outside zone counter. That was their bread and butter, man. That buck sweep was like this play, this wrinkle they'd run 3-4 times a game that they're catching you because you're thinking here, and then boom, we pin and pull, get that sucker out the gate, and then you're making a cut. Where Oklahoma was a pin and pull all the time team. Mm-hmm. They're always wrapping, doing something with all that stuff. But yet there were certain fundamentals that you found true in both lines. Trying to play with good pad level, playing with good angles, using your hands effectively, working your feet through contact, being good finishers, getting to the second level, all those type of things was identical as far as an emphasis on it, working within two completely different schemes, right? And so that's why my hope is that in that regard, Rob, there are no differences in that area. In as far as what the essentials are, what are the most importance that Joe Rudolph is focusing on, I hope they're exactly the same as Coach Heastand. Now, the drills will look different, most likely. Some of those will be different. The way that Coach Rudolph goes about teaching will be different, which is always true, going from one coach to another. But at the end of the day, I hope the end result and the style of play is you can't tell the difference. If you can't tell the difference between Joe Rudolph's line and Harry Heastand's line, then this is going to be a great year because now these guys have that experience under Coach Heastand, where Coach Heastand's not taking a right tackle on Blake Fisher with tons of talent, but only has played a game and a half of football and missed basically almost his entire freshman year with an injury. Now Coach Rudolph gets to inherit that guy, but with a year, 2 starts, plus a full other year under his belt. So you'll see that growth. The hope is that this offensive line is even better. So Coach Heastand lays the foundation, turns the corner, reestablishes what you need to do, and then Coach Rudolph builds on it. And if he builds on it, this line will even be better than last year's was.
Right.
That's the hope.
Yep.
And it's going to look very similar because the most importance are the same. That's what I'm looking for.
What you said, what I got out of that, the whole thing, I'm going to wrap it up with a little bow.
I get it. I'm long-winded. I understand.
No. But if you don't know the difference between last year and this year, that's what we want. That's absolutely what we want.
Yeah.
T Guns over under 1.75
used to get these all the time, and we don't get as many of these anymore. I miss the over unders.
But 1.75 is such an odd number. But anyway, O-line All-Americans by season.
It's T Guns. What did you expect?
I know.
Of course, he's got to be different.
Look, if my bold prediction comes true, I'm taking the over because you got Joe Alt and you got Zeke Correll. So I'll take the over.
So Vince, To me, are we talking any All-American first, second, or third?
I think so.
Then the over's easy.
Okay.
So we agree. I'm gonna I'm gonna narrow the question down a little bit.
Okay.
Just to have a little bit more. I want to get your prediction on this.
Okay.
What is the number of All-Americans by season's end? First team All-Americans by at least one outlet.
Man.
I'm still actually taking the over.
Are you?
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a good chance that you could see both tackles and center. Like I think those. Oh, well, are we talking freshman All-Americans or just All-Americans?
Let's go All-Americans because Notre Dame, unless Charles Jagusah plays, Notre Dame. It's cool, right? If Billy Schrauth becomes freshman All-American, but I hate those because he's not a freshman.
Me too. I do too. I just didn't. I want to get the clarification on
Let's go the main one, the big one.
Okay.
Right. Unless it's a true freshman, then I'm okay with it.
Sure. Right. And if a true freshman is starting, then I think some things have gone wrong. But that's another conversation. So oh man, I don't want to make it sound like I've got the rose-colored glasses, but I think there's 3 different guys who could fall on a list as a first-team All-American. So I'll take the over.
I like that. I'm with you. He's got a couple over under, so we're going to kind of get back to his questions. We'll kind of go back and forth between those. And we also have a super chat down here from Matt, 2011 GT. Haven't seen you in a show in a while, man. Good to see it. Good to see you with us live today.
Yeah, and thanks for the super chat.
Changed his avatar too. Remember, he used to have that. He actually used to have his 2011 GT in the avatar.
Yes, he did.
Now he's got his bearded face in there. So there you go. There you go.
Finally able to make a live. Loving the content. Did you see that other show? I don't know what show that's.
I don't know what show that is. I don't
So,
know. Matt,
if you're still in here,
referring to?
Yeah, let us know
what show you're referring to, my friend.
I don't watch anything but Irish Breakdown,
so we'll address it. Yeah, I don't know if he's talking about a TV show, movie show. I don't know. So we'll find out. But I hope, Matt, let me know, man. Let me know what you're referring to. We'll get to it.
Irish Guardian Not says, I'm interested in hearing the comparison between Harry, Jeff Quinn, and Rudolph's coaching styles. I hear that fundamentally Harry and Rudolph are very similar, but how does he compare to?
It was just kind of went on to Coach Easton. Gotcha. This is also one that was put out before the show started.
Gotcha, because we touched on this.
And I wanted to bring this one up again because I think this ties back into the first one, which is what are we going to tell the difference in this offensive lines, right? Because at the end of the day, coaching styles don't matter a whole lot in regard to, and when I think coaching styles, I mean like how you go about your practices, what's your volume, right? What's the language you use. Some coaches don't believe in cuss words. Some coaches, it's just like second nature to them. It's just like part of their vocabulary, right? That to me that's a coaching style. What I care more about is what's the end result. You know, and so to me, Joe Rudolph could be like Jeff Quinn was a sweet man. He really was a good man. He really was. He was. I'm being serious. Like,
no, it was just funny the way you said it. That's all. Because I completely agree with you.
And
I've had conversations with him that are fascinating.
And I promise you, they were him just walking up to you and starting a conversation.
100%.
Because he's just a good dude.
Because it was back when he was an analyst and I was on the sidelines doing my Gatorade thing.
Right.
And so he couldn't coach, right? And so he was just out there just being there. And we just struck up a conversation. And he approached me. Like it was awesome. It was a great conversation.
And he was different than Coach Easton. I mean, their personalities are very different.
No doubt.
But that's not why he wasn't effective.
Right.
Coach Rudolph, to me, probably has a personality a little bit more like Jeff Quinn from a coaching style standpoint, as opposed to Coach Easton. But it doesn't matter. What matters is what are your most importance? Like what are the things that you're emphasizing in practice geared towards getting your players to play fundamentally smart football with force? That's the key, right? And unfortunately, Coach Quinn's units were usually fundamentally good. Even the 2021 offensive line early in the year, they had a lot of mistakes, but you understood it. You had a brand new left guard, you had a brand new right guard, you had a brand new right tackle. I mean, you were replacing 4 starters from the year before, basically. And two of the guys that got starting experience from the year before, Josh Lugg and Zeke Correll, were getting starts this year at new positions.
New positions. Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
With Zeke being at guard and Josh bumping back out. Because Josh actually started the game in 2021 or 2020 at center. Remember that? When Zeke and Jarrett Patterson both got hurt?
We were talking about a 6'7" guy at center. Like, it just
Yeah. But it is what it is. So to me, it wasn't that coaching style. It was they were not coached to play with the physicality and the force. So they were pretty assignment correct for the most part. They just didn't play with that drive. They were catchers a lot. And we've talked about this. Part of the reason the 2020 offensive line was so successful is because those kids were meeting with Coach Easton during the summer and at times during the season to make sure that those things were being reprioritized, because they knew, because again, this is what the difference was between a Coach Easton line and a Coach Quinn line. It's kind of like, Vince, if you kids know, right? So you teach your children certain things, and they're going to go and be in a class somewhere, and a teacher's going to be saying something that's like, this guy sounds and has the same demeanor as my dad, but he's saying things that don't match up with what my dad told me is right, or whatever, right? Yep. So the message, the delivery, all that may be the same, but if the message is different, if the emphasis is different, then the kids are going to notice that. And they're going to like, no, that's not right. And so with the veterans on the 2020 line, they knew, okay, coach is going to get us set up with what to do and all that. But we know we can't be successful if we're playing the way we did last year, because we played for Coach Easton. We know what's expected of you. We know that you're supposed to go out there and play this way, this way, and this way. Because Tommy Kramer spent 2 years with Coach Easton. Liam Eichenberg spent 2 years with Coach Easton. Tommy Kramer spent 2 years with Coach Easton. Robert Haynes only spent 1, but it was as a starter, right? Aaron Banks spent a year with Coach Easton. Josh Lugg spent a year with Coach Easton. They knew, hey, that's not right. We need to play this way. So then that's why they sought him out. And then the leadership from those guys then kind of bled to the whole unit. Well, the next year when those guys are all gone, we saw what we saw, right? And so at the end of the day, the coaching style doesn't matter as much as what are the most importance. And as long as Joe Rudolph's most importance are the same as Coach Easton's, I don't care about the style. Yep. Because the end result will be the same.
And that goes back to what I was saying earlier about hearing what he has to say the first 2 days of practice.
Right.
Because every coach I've ever met, what you value is what you stress the first couple of days of practice,
and what you demand in every single day of work.
Exactly. And he doesn't have to yell at him. Like, Harry Easton was a yeller. That's not breaking news to anybody, right? The volume of his voice was high. I mean, he even yelled at our guy who was taking video, right? He's a yeller. And so it doesn't have to be yelling, but it's the stress that we're looking for, what he's saying is the most important. What is he stressing? And how, I don't care how he gets it across. I don't care. You've had coaches that yell at you. You've had coaches that don't yell at you. You don't listen to the volume of the voice. You listen to the content that's coming your way. Like that's the most important thing, right? So I don't care how he gets it to the players, as long as it's the right information that's getting passed on. That's all I care about. So
agree.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens.
It's a good question.
It's a great question.
It really is a really good question. It just, I think that's something that if you and I didn't have coaching backgrounds, we would be wondering that.
Absolutely.
So this guy seems a little bit different. What's that going to matter?
Right.
It's a very good question. Very good question.
Justin Knox with the super chat. Thank you so much, Justin. It says, loves the show as Shears, gentlemen. Which 3 position groups need to perform better than expected to put us in a playoff spot?
He meant to say as usual. He put that down later. So just
perfect. Okay, I was like, as Shears. All right, we'll go with it.
Playoff, I know what that means.
I need my haircut. I don't know.
Yeah, we both need haircuts.
Okay.
Which 3 position game groups need to perform better than expected to put us in a playoff spot? Better than expected. I'm going to take the question as it is. Better than expected. Okay. Because I think for me, the biggest thing for me is that I think for me, it's more about getting groups to play up to their potential. But there are 3 units that I think could have a big impact on putting them in a playoff spot. And the reason I'll say that is because if a unit plays better than expected, Vince, then something that you were anticipating maybe being a weakness that you had to overcome with other areas becomes a strength. And so here's a couple. I don't know if
wrote
I can
down
give you
3.
three.
I'm curious to see what you write.
Yeah, I don't know if I can give you
say.
3, but I'll do my best unless I go to special teams. But I'm going to give you 1 on each side of the ball. Safety.
Check.
If the safety position plays better than expected, this defense is going to be really good. Really good.
Yep.
The reason I can't say linebackers, because I actually expect the linebackers to play really well. If they play better than expected, holy crap, basically is the way I look at it, right? Offensively, it's tight end. I think we're expecting this big drop in production. And I think we will see a drop in production, but I don't think we're going to see a huge drop in effectiveness. And part of that is because teams are going to be king on that group like they were Michael Mayer. So I think we're going to see a lot of clutch catches and big plays and things like that. So if the tight end unit is better than expected, and let's say we get like 50 catches from that group, that means this offense is going to be this offense is going to be pretty good. The third group, Vince, is tougher for me. Who's your third?
So I had safety and tight end written down. Those are 2 of my 3. And then my third one, I put wide receiver.
Okay.
Just because I think the expectation, like that's the key word, right? I do think the wide receivers are going to take a step in the right direction. I think they're going to take a couple of steps in the right direction, to be honest with you. But to be a playoff team, I think they got to play a little maybe better than I expect them to play. And I think the potential is there for that to happen.
Yeah.
But it kind of goes part and parcel with the tight ends if we're talking about, receiving production.
You're making the same case at receiver that I'm making a tight end.
100%. Right? Yes, absolutely.
I got you.
Absolutely. And it goes along with my thought that the offense is going to be better this year than it's been in a while, right? So
that's
the
fair.
wide receivers, the tight end, like all of that needs to take a step up. So those would be my 3.
Right. That's good. Somebody said D tackles. I actually expect the D tackles to be pretty good this year.
Me too.
Same with the defensive line. Like the defensive line should be good this year. If it's not, there's a coaching problem or there's a rash of injuries. Like this should be a pretty good defensive line. The question is it going to be a great defensive line? I think that's more of the question for me.
Sure.
But there's a lot of talent coming back. A lot of talent coming back. So yeah,
it's a good question from Justin.
Questions, Vince. There's a lot of. I'm looking through these and starring these. There's a lot of good questions today. There really are. There really are. Let's go with this one.
T Guns, if Spindler and Strouth are starting guards by, say, week 3, is the line going to end up winning the Moore Award?
As long as it's not injury related, I think they're going to have a good shot. I mean, because again, if Rocco Spindler has beaten Andrew Kristofic out by game 3, as long as there's not like Andrew didn't get hurt and like miss 3 weeks of fall camp, right? As long as it's just Andrew did his thing, but Rocco just was better. And by game 3, he beat him out. Yeah, this line's going to have a chance to be the Joe Moore Award winners for sure. Now, again, there's a lot more that needs to happen. The tackles need to be as good as we expect. Zeke needs to take that another jump, in year 2, that kind of thing, of course. But yeah, that's going to help them a bunch. Now, will that be the reason they win the Joe Moore Award? No. Could it be the final catalyst to it? Sure.
Yeah. This combination right here is the highest ceiling of the 5. Yeah. Would you agree with that? Like that's how I feel. If those 2 are starting at guard, I feel like this offensive line has the highest ceiling possibility. Yeah. And it is key though that Rocco doesn't win it based on injury. If everybody's healthy and all things are equal and he wins that spot, then the ceiling just went up even higher.
And I believe Tommy's question assumes that he beats him out. But I just wanted to make sure that people understood that that's what I'm referring to. And Vince, I want to read the next one because I want to get your thoughts on it first before I answer. So Paulie B27 asks a question. I think this is a really good one too. What is the most crucial aspect this season for Notre Dame to make a playoff run and actually compete? So let's take away coaching stuff. So Marcus Freeman needs to make second-year growth, or Rudolph's got to do his thing. Let's focus as far as the on-the-field product, from a player standpoint. What is the most crucial aspect this season for Notre Dame to make a playoff run and actually compete? So meaning like you get into the playoff and you win a game, go to the title game, or you play Bama, Georgia in round 1, and it's a 4-quarter down to the wire, last team that has the ball last wins kind of game situation. That's what I view as competing. So win a game, be competitive in the next one, or even if you lose to to me, what I will not say actually compete is if you get in and you play a Cincinnati and you lose, that's bullcrap. Like that's not a positive, right? But you get in there, you play one of the big dogs, and you take them down to the wire.
Yeah, if they get in and lose again, they haven't taken a step. Like,
yeah, well,
that's
I would say it depends on how they lose.
okay. Fair enough.
I mean, it's not the step you want, but it's at least a step. Like they weren't competitive
You're right.
against Alabama.
It's a baby step.
Right.
It's a step, though. You're right.
Yeah.
It is. It's a step in the right
As long
direction.
as that game. Now, again, if
Right.
if the loss is to Florida State, then you haven't taken a step.
Sure.
I'm talking about if they get in there and they lose in that kind of game to Georgia or Alabama, that's and it's a 4-quarter game. If it's like the 19 and 17 games against Georgia, if it's like that, then yeah,
where you have a chance to win in the last possession, kind of a thing.
Right. Yeah. Right. Then you've taken a step. You're not where you need to be yet, but you've at least taken a step. It's not the step, but it's a step. So, but yes, so that's what we're getting to, Vince. So let's answer the question. What is the most crucial aspect this season for Notre Dame to make a playoff run and actually compete?
Okay. Here's how I'm attacking this question. Okay. I'm going based on what the schedule says. Okay. So that my answer is going to be schedule based. Okay. I have all the faith in the world that this team is going to be ready to play Ohio State, Clemson, and USC. I have all the faith in the world that that's going to happen. I am. The crucial part for me is how do they play against NC State on the road? How do they play against Duke on the road? And how do they play against Pitt at home? Because of where those 3 games are situated on the schedule, how are they going to play those games? They've got the talent to beat every one of those teams and should beat every one of those teams. But the way that they are situated, so in case anybody is unaware, right? NC State is the first game on the road, not counting Ireland, obviously, but it's the first legit opponent on the road. Duke is the one that follows Ohio State, and Pitt is the one that is sandwiched in between Southern Cal and Clemson. Okay. How do they play in those games? I think is going to be a telltale sign of how this team is coached and where they're moving forward to. Have they taken that step? Because they didn't play real well in those games last year. How do they play in those games this year? If they go out and they take care of business in those games, I think that's the crucial step to moving forward and playing and taking that step in the playoff.
I love where your head was because you thought outside the box on that one. That was I love it. I'm gonna go a little bit more basic.
Okay.
What's the most crucial aspect? Quarterback play. Because that's been the thing holding them back in other games is quarterback play.
Sure.
If Sam Hartman is who we think he can be with the talent he'll have around him, because everybody talks about, well, Sam Hartman really isn't playing with that much of a better roster at Notre Dame. And I'm like, well, explain. Well, he had A.T. Perry and Donovan Green and Kylan. I'm like, well, hold on a second. You're just focusing on one part of that, or the receivers. Well, what about the running backs? What about the tight ends? What about the offensive line? And more importantly, which doesn't get talked about enough, he's going to have a way better defense than he had at Wake Forest.
He doesn't need to shoot out offensively.
Yes.
He doesn't need to put the team on his back.
Like, exactly. Here's a point, Ryan. Or Vince, goodness gracious. I'm sorry, dude.
It's okay.
It's okay. I call Ryan Vince. It's like my grandmother's been calling me Marty, which is one of her sons for like my entire life, which it's kind of a compliment, because I know she, looks at me that way. But like, if you look at Wake Forest last year, they won 8 games last season, including a close overtime loss to Clemson and a 3-point late loss at Duke, a 2-point loss in North Carolina. They won 8 games last year and gave up 28.3 points per game. It gets even crazier. In 2021, they went 11-3, and that includes a 3-point loss at North Carolina in a season in which they gave up 28.9 points per game. Notre Dame has a losing record last year if they have a defense that gives up 28.9 points per game, right?
Yep.
So it's not just the receivers. Now, I think it's debatable because my whole thing is if Notre Dame had Sam Hartman the last year and Wake Forest had Drew Pine and Tyler Buckner last year, are you telling me how great the wide receivers are?
Exactly.
At Wake Forest?
It's like the chicken and the egg, right? Like,
right.
You know what I mean? That's the thing. Yes, they're good. He made them great receivers. He made them very good.
Right.
Because he's throwing them the football.
Right.
I mean, I always, when I was coaching receivers, I was like, hey, it's our job to make the quarterback look good, right? Well, in this regard, the quarterback made the receivers look really good. And I'm not taking anything away from A.T. Perry or whatever. That's not my intention here. But it helps to have a quarterback putting the ball where it needs to be for a receiver to be really good.
And that's the biggest thing. So for me, for this team to be what it's going to be, if they're going to beat Ohio State, if they're going to beat USC and beat Clemson, if they're going to do what you talked about, win those tougher games at NC State, at Duke, at Louisville, he's got to be better than he was at Wake, because he can't have those 3 turnover games. You go on the road and throw 3 picks against NC State like you did last year, Notre Dame can lose that game.
Sure.
You know, same thing against like a North Carolina, a Duke or a Pitt or a Louisville, right? Teams that he's played against. I mean, he threw 3 or 4 interceptions against Louisville last year. Can't have that happen this year for Notre Dame. I don't think it's going to happen. There's a lot of reasons why I think some of that stuff happened. We'll get into, but I just don't think that's going to happen this year. I think he's going to have a lot more easy read throws, meaning play actions and RPOs, because every team he played last year, Vince, played to stop the pass.
Yes.
That's going to lead to more turnovers.
Correct.
Teams that play Notre Dame now are going to play to stop the run. And if they don't play to stop the run, then Sam Hartman's only going to throw for like 220 yards in that game, and Notre Dame's going to score 50 because they're going to run for 300.
Correct.
If Sam Hartman only threw for 220 at Wake Forest, barring something, they were going to have a tougher time to win those games, right? That's just the reality of it. So to me, Vince, it's he's got to be what we think he's going to be. Mm-hmm. He's got to be that guy that's a 30-plus touchdown, 10 fewer interception guy that more importantly plays well in the big games, right? Like you look at the biggest game that they played in last year, he was brilliant. I mean, he was brilliant against Clemson last year. Give me that same energy when you're playing Ohio State, when you're playing Clemson this year, when you're playing USC. If he's that guy, then I think the rest of the roster is set for this team to be a team to go out and win it. Partly because I don't think Alabama's as good as they've been in past years when they've been title teams. I don't think Georgia's going to be as good this year as they have been in the last couple of years. But they're still going to be very good.
Yeah.
And so you've got to be able to do that. That to me is the big key. It's quarterback. And of course, the other one is like other units can't underachieve, and there's always that kind of stuff. But like as long as those other units are just what they are, what they've been in the past, the biggest thing that's been lacking in the Notre Dame's playoff teams has been quarterback play. And I think they're going to be really good there this year. So to me, that's the big key.
We got another super chat from Justin Knox. Thank you so much, Justin. How many points, if we're a legitimate playoff team, do we average this season? 35, 40? I mean, I don't want to jump on your answer here, but
go for
it. 40 is the number that has jumped out at me for a long time. I feel like that's kind of the magic number is 40. And I think they have a legitimate shot to do that this year. Short answer, but that's where I'm at.
My answer is a bit of a cop-out, and it's I don't know. Again, because I don't know how the rule changes are going to impact per-game scoring averages.
Sure.
Also, Notre Dame's schedule is uptick this year. 35 this year, combined with a tougher schedule and the shorter games, could be a top 15 to top 12 scoring offense. I don't know the answer to that, right? I mean, that's the difficulty. To me, at the end of the day, what I care more about is being a top 15 scoring offense. That's what I care about. I don't care about being top 10 in yards. I care about being top 10 in efficiency, yards per play. I care about Notre Dame making a big jump in big plays, which will factor into the yards per play as well. But I care about them being a top 10 to 12 scoring offense. That's what I care about. Okay. They've got to be able to score like that. You look at last year, all 4 playoff teams, if I'm reading this, Ohio State, Ohio State, Georgia, Michigan, and TCU were all top 10 scoring offenses. They all ranked 9th or better. The year before, it wasn't quite that way. 2021, however, Bama made the playoff. They were number 6. Georgia was number 9. Cincinnati was 11. Michigan was at 16, right? So, again, all in the top 20 in scoring offense. The exception in recent seasons was Notre Dame in 2020, and they could not score in the playoff game enough to be competitive. But you look in 2020, the other 3 teams that made the playoff that year, Bama was 2nd, Clemson was 3rd, and Ohio State was 11th. So you're seeing a theme, top 15, top 10-ish scoring offenses. So to me, I want to answer your question, Justin, but I don't want to say 40 points per game like Vince did, because no, I'm not Vince. That's
I get where you're coming from because of the changes.
If we're talking about the previous rules, then yes, like 38 to 40 is where you got to be. But I don't know what kind of. And it's not so much plays; it's possessions.
Right.
And how many fewer possessions are they going to be? Now, here's the other part of that, Vince. If they're a more efficient offense, and their defense is getting more stops, Notre Dame is going to have the same amount of possessions, if not more than they did last year. So then you do look at it. So
Sure.
my whole point is I just don't know how the game is going to be impacted by the rule changes. But I can tell you confidently, Justin, that being in that top 10 to 12 range is where you need to be. And it's got to be there because you're consistently good at putting points on the board.
Right.
And that's where I don't want to be. So, for example, in 2019, Notre Dame set an all-time scoring record for points, and they had their highest points per game total since, a long time. I mean, Notre Dame averaged 36.8 points per game. I don't know that they've done that. I mean, I can't remember the last time that Notre Dame had that kind of offense. I have no clue. I'd probably have to go back to like some of Lou Holtz's teams, I guess, to kind of get into that category. I'm trying to see what the 89 team averaged. The 1989 team, which was a really dynamic offense, averaged 32.8, right? Because, again, different era. 91 team averaged 35.8. The 92 team, 36.4. The 93 team, 35.6. So 36.8 is really good, right? But here's why they averaged that many points that year. They scored 66 against New Mexico, 52 against Bowling Green, 52 against Navy, 40 against Boston College, and 45 against Stanford. The only team, and then 38 against Duke. The only team of that stretch that had a winning record that year was Navy, who Notre Dame outclassed. But then they scored 17 points against Georgia and 14 points against Michigan. They played 3 ranked teams that year. They went 1-2. They scored 17 points against Georgia, 14 points against Michigan, and then they blew out Navy, which I don't care about. So great, 36.8 points per game. But your offense did not show up in the 2 games that you lost. The 2 big games, the 2 best teams that you played, your offense didn't show up. I would rather average 33 points a game because you underachieve against Tennessee State and Navy and those teams, but you show up and ball against those best teams. Now, I don't think that's possible. I don't think you can suck in 8 games, but then step up, be great in the 4 that you win, the big games. I think there's a level of consistency, which is where the average can be up. But I don't want to see them scoring 38, 39, 40 points per game because they hang a 70 spot on Tennessee State.
Right.
And a 60 spot on Central Michigan
or something.
Right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I don't want to see that. That doesn't mean anything. And they score 50 against Wake Forest, right? I don't care, right? It's, can you score 30 against Ohio State?
Right.
Can you score 30 plus against USC?
Right.
Can you win a shootout if you need to against USC? Can you go out and score a 35 again on Clemson on the road? That's what I care about. Now, you could score under your season average in all 3 of those games and have a great offensive performance, right? And that's what I care about. That's the ultimate goal for me. So to answer the question, top 10-ish is where they need to be ranking-wise. We'll have a better idea after the season of what that looks like relative to past seasons.
And the new reality of what offensive
it may not change a whole lot, Vince. It may not. I don't know. It could still be the same range. I don't know the answer to that, but we'll find out. It's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly can't tell, because I could sit there and say 40 and they score 37 and rank 6th in scoring.
Right.
Well, they get to 40. So, you know what I mean? Like, we now have a better context. And I think that's where Vince is coming from, is like 40 in past years meant top 10. It meant 7, 8, right?
It was always the magic number. Like, it just felt like 40 was the magic number going into,
like last year, if you score 40, you rank 7th or higher. And 2021, if you average 40, you're 6th or higher. The year before that, in 2020, I don't even count 2020 because it was such a weird year. Like, there's a team that had played 4 games, a team that played 7, a team that played 6, that kind of thing. 2019, if you were at 40, you were no lower than 9th. 2018, if you were at 40, you were 12th or higher. And a lot of those teams were again, 2 MAC teams in there. You had Utah State, Houston, Central Florida. You're top 5 or 6 in Power 5, right? So to Vince's point, if you're top 40, you're top 10.
Right.
So we're saying the same thing, Vince. It's just
right. I always forget the new reality of these rule changes and how that's going to affect things. And
but we're on the same page with what 40 mean. What 40 in the past meant.
Correct.
Is top 7 to 8.
Right.
And that's kind of where I'm at.
Agreed.
Yeah. Top 10 for sure. So we're on the same page, buddy.
T Guns, best odds to become an All-American from non-tackle players.
So I'm going to go with
offense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're talking O-line. I'm going to go with Zeke Correll.
Yes.
Because he's a known commodity. It'll be him or Billy Schrauth, because there's always the thought of, hey, this younger guy came out of nowhere. But I usually feel like with All-American lists, there's some level of like part of the reason Joe Alt was an All-American last year is because he was on people's radar because he was a freshman All-American the year before and he played
and
for
that's
Harry
the key.
Easton.
And the fact that Zeke Correll is garnering some preseason love,
right,
it puts him on the radar. And that's
right.
It feels that way from an offensive line standpoint. You've got to be on the radar because there's so many people that just don't evaluate offensive linemen very well. I'll just say that. And if you're not on the radar, if you're not a known name going into the season, then you're not going to be a known name going out of the season unless some analyst picks out an offensive lineman and it gains traction throughout the season. You know what I mean? Like it has to be a known name. It has to be. And that is more so at the offensive line position than any other position in football because you don't have any stats to go along with it. You can make up stats and you talk pancakes and all kinds of other crap, but it's not a statistical position. You have to be able to evaluate the position. And so many guys just aren't good at it. And so if you're not a known name, then you're not going to get a lot of love. Zeke Correll's getting some love, some preseason love. So his name is going to be out there as a center. So I think he's got the best shot as well.
Yep, I dig that. Good answer, Vince. Very good answer.
Rob Osgood. Who do you think will give the Notre Dame offensive line the biggest challenge this year during the regular season?
I think Ohio State.
Okay.
I think for a couple reasons. Number one is Jim Knowles is not going to just be a sit back and play our right like Clemson did. You're not going to get that. Hey, our guys are really good. We're just going to sit back and do our thing. Their thing, they're going to do their thing, but their thing is complex. It's twists. It's delayed pressures. And the other part is that's the most talented defensive line they're going to play all year. I mean, I think they underachieved a bit last year, but it's kind of like part of the reason that I'm higher on Ohio State than most people are. Like I see a lot of Notre Dame fans, maybe I should say, and some of the there's some national people very high on Ohio State, and some people are too high. Like I have 12 different guys that are like slated to be first round draft picks by somebody. It's just absurd.
Wow.
But the point is there's a lot of talent on this football team, and especially the defensive line. You've got all those highly ranked former 5-stars. Jack Sawyer has not played like a 5-star. JT flashed that last year. Michael Hall is that kind of guy. And then there's a lot of depth there. And I think they're going to be fine losing Zach Harrison. They're going to be fine with Javonte Jean-Baptiste because they're pretty talented. They're pretty deep. I think their linebacking core is going to continue to be good. But the argument that I'm going to make with them is part of the reason I think they're going to be better this year is they're going to be healthier on offense, right? So we'll see how the quarterback – I mean, you had C.J. Stroud last year, but C.J. didn't have Jackson Smith and Jigba. Your running backs were banged up all year. There were things like that kind of went into play. But it's kind of like the same argument that I'm going to use for Notre Dame. I can't say that I think Notre Dame's going to be better on defense this year because you're going into year 2 of Al Golden and then not make the same argument for Jim Knowles.
Right.
Because you're going to the same situation. The only caveat that I will say, and this is I'd say caveat, this is the one a bit unknown that makes me, in the back of my head, as soon as I say that, kind of question it a little bit, is because the one thing that I will say about Jim Knowles is his defense is really complex. And you saw a lot of improvement from Ohio State last year. The problem is that his previous stops, it usually took till year 3. To really see a big difference, right? So in year 1 at Oklahoma State, they went from 32.5 points per game the year before. Actually, I'm sorry. His first year was 2018. They went from his first year in 2018, they gave up 32.5 points per game. That was actually up from the previous year from 29.4. Same thing happened at Duke when he took over. I think he took over in 2012. Let me just check his resume. 2010 actually. He took over 2010. So in the first year before, in 2009, they gave up 28.3 points per game. They gave up 35 his second year. And then 31 the next year, 36 the next. It really wasn't until year 4. Now, at Oklahoma State, it wasn't until year 3 that they took over, right? So you look at Oklahoma State, in 2018, his first year, they gave up 32.5. They gave up 26.8 the next year, and then 23.5. So that was when they started really good. And then year 4, they exploded, but they were pretty good in year 3. Here's the difference, though. He never had the talent at those places like he's going to inherit at Ohio State. So he wasn't just rebuilding the scheme at Duke and Oklahoma State. He was rebuilding the roster.
Sure.
At Ohio
That
State,
takes
you don't really
time.
need to read. I mean, there's some areas you need to get a little better here, a little better there,
Sure.
but you're inheriting a pretty talented roster. And we saw a big jump in year one. I mean, they were not great last year on defense, but they were much better than they were the year before. I mean, 2021, they were 22.8 points per game. This past year, they're 21.0. That might not seem like a whole lot, but I would argue they played a better schedule this year, honestly, than they did in 2021. But here's the thing. They played better in the big games. Like they gave up 42 to Michigan the year before, 45 to Utah. They gave up 35 to Oregon in a loss, 31 to Minnesota. They had a lot of blowouts of bad teams. They only gave up 7 to Akron, 7 to Indiana, 7 to Michigan State, stuff like that. Where this past year, they gave up 45 to Michigan in a bad game, but they had just better performances overall to me. There was a little bit more consistency, and their offense wasn't as good last year as it was the year before because they couldn't run the football the way they could the year before because of all the injuries at running back and some of the issues on the offensive line. So, there's some question marks at Ohio State offensive line and all that, but I really do think their defense is going to be able to carry that team much better in some of the bigger moments than it did in the last couple of years. Now, how much of a jump will that be? I don't know, but the one thing I do know is their defensive line is very talented, and their defensive line kicked Notre Dame's offensive line's butt last year.
Yeah.
So so to make a short story long, that's why I think Ohio State is that team. I think they're going to be a much better on defense this year than people think. And the other part, Vince, is they do so much of those delayed pressures and different stunts, and they bring safety fires, corner fires, all that. They put a lot on an offensive line. Where Clemson just said, hey, we're going to line up and play our game because we're better than you. And Notre Dame was like, no, you're not. You know what I mean?
I hope they do that again, by the way.
Yeah, me too. But Ohio State's not going to do that. They're not just going to sit back and say, hey, we're better than you, so we're just going to play basic stuff. That's not who Jim Knowles is.
Right.
And you don't hire Jim Knowles to do that. You hire Jim Knowles to have an NFL complex-ish type of scheme that allows you to attack. And so I think they're going to be a lot better in year two.
So
I really do.
I got out my Lindy's and I'm looking at the position.
Where'd you get
groups.
that?
I know, right? Job. We'll call it a business expense. The defensive lines, the top 10, right? Notre Dame plays 3 of them, which I think is very interesting. Sure.
So Ohio State is
Correct.
1. I'm going to go Clemson being 1 in there.
They're number 4.
Correct. And then Duke.
Yeah, number 10.
Yeah.
Duke is number 10. And then if you
With
take into
former
account,
Notre Dame nose tackle Jamion Franklin is one of their starters.
And they talk about him in here as well. So then if you take into account the linebacking core, there's 2, which should be fairly obvious. Clemson and Ohio State.
Right.
Clemson is 1, Ohio State is 5. So I think
there's only 1 in the DB. Is there only 1 in the DBs, or is there 2? 2 Clemson, Ohio State in the DBs?
Clemson, Ohio State in DBs, and that is it. Yep.
Yeah.
And Notre Dame is obviously in the DBs as well.
Right. Some people have Notre Dame's linebackers in the top 10 as well. I saw one. I can't remember who it was, but one had Notre Dame's D-line in the top 10.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it might have been Athlon.
Okay.
Now that I think about it. Because they're not in the one you just looked at, right, Vince?
No. They're only in defensive backs.
It could have been Athlon. I could be wrong on that, but I thought one of the preseason rankings had Notre Dame's defensive line in the top 10. Let me just look here real quick, Vince. I could be completely making that up. Yeah, they're not in this one. I could have been making that up, but I thought I saw somebody had their defensive line in the top 10. So, but yeah, so back to that question. I think Ohio State, because it's not just the D line.
Right.
It's the scheme, the D line talent, and the linebackers.
Because if you take the rankings, let's say from Lindy's, and you average them out from defensive line and linebackers, Clemson should be the number 1 overall. Yes. But this scheme,
which I don't agree with, by the way.
Yeah, the scheme doesn't.
I do not agree that Clemson has better talent on the D line than Ohio State. I don't.
Right.
I think Clemson's defense last year was considered really good, more on their reputation than them actually being really good. I mean, you're talking about a team, and here's the other part. You're talking about a team that just got absolutely ripped apart by Sam Hartman and got ripped apart by Notre Dame and could not stop Spencer Rattler in the second half either. I mean, that was Florida State had a good offense, but they still gave up 28 points in that game. Right. They were ranked as high as they were because they held a bunch of bad teams. The only really good defensive game that I thought they played all year against a good team was against North Carolina. That's it. Yeah. And the team that they shut down, they weren't. I just thought their defense was overrated last year. Now, I think they're going to be a little better this year because I think their offense is going to be better. They don't have to carry the team the way they did last year. But I think Clemson's defense was not as good as it was last year, or it was not as good as people thought it was last year.
Gotcha.
But they're still living off the previous reputation. I mean,
Right.
Clemson giving up 20.9 points per game last year is not good. They gave up 14.8 the year before. Right. And the non-COVID years, 13.5 before that, 13.1 before that, 13.6 before that, 18 before that. They hadn't given up over 20 points in a non-COVID season since 2015. The first year they really made their big run.
Yeah.
So I just was not impressed with their defense last year. And again, they tried to come out and play mano-a-mano against Notre Dame because they thought their players were better than Notre Dame's players. And Notre Dame showed them very quickly that they were not.
Right.
They were not. And now you take the quarterback that absolutely shredded them in a game, right? And Sam Hartman, who, I mean, Vince, I'm just going to give his numbers again just because I like to do it. Against Clemson last year, Sam Hartman led Clemson to 45 points. He went 20 of 29 for 337 yards and 6 touchdowns.
I was going to say, I thought this was the 6 touchdown game. I was going to say that, but yeah.
Right. He did that against Clemson. Now, I think one of the touchdowns, I believe, came in overtime. I believe. I could be wrong on that. I can't remember, but I think it did. And then you're going to put that with you're going to put him on the team that rushed for 263 yards against Clemson. Right? I mean, that's what we're talking about here. So yeah, I'm not as worried about Clemson. I mean, maybe I should. I'm more worried about Clemson's offense next year than I am about their defense, to be completely honest with you. I think Notre Dame will have success against them. And they did that, Vince, with throwing for 85 yards.
Right. Oh, they were so one-dimensional.
Because their secondary wasn't that good that last year. Like, I'm seeing all these preseason rankings that's Clemson secondary in the top 10. And I'm like, based on what? Did you not watch every good team they played last year just throw the ball on them?
Right.
Except Notre Dame, who didn't need to. But remember, that was the part of the matchup we felt really good about going into the game.
Yes.
But
we didn't want to, we didn't think that they were, not that they couldn't do it, but the chance of success was going to be better going and
Vince,
as opposed to
told me before the game that Notre Dame's only going to pass for 85 yards. I'm like, oh my God, this is they're going to get murdered. Or the weather was so bad.
Yeah, right.
That like 15, if I'd have told you before the game that Deshaun Watson was going to throw for 91 yards, that you'd be like, man, Notre Dame's going to kill Clemson.
Right.
I mean, but it was more of a weather thing. Really.
Sure.
And that's kind of partly why Notre Dame didn't throw the ball a whole lot, is because of the weather. But the difference is Notre Dame needed that. We thought.
Right.
They needed to be able to take some pressure off the run game. Didn't matter.
No, they didn't.
Didn't matter a lick.
Not that day.
Ohio State won't do that. Jim Knowles is not that dumb.
Right.
And not only is he not dumb, that's just not who he is. That's not his defensive philosophy. It's not like he's got to tee stuff up for Notre Dame. That's just who Jim Knowles is.
Right.
And that's just what he likes to do. So I'm just not I think that's going to be a tough battle. Now it's one Notre Dame can win, because I think Notre Dame, if Notre Dame's receivers are as good as we think they can be, I think Notre Dame can make some plays in the pass game. And I think they can find ways to run the football in Ohio State. They just need to do so. Right. And that's what Michigan has done. That's what teams that have had success against Ohio State have done. They've been able to come out and run the football and be balanced. Yep. They're going to need to do that. And they weren't that last year.
Adam Shipley has a question about Northwestern. Thoughts on the Northwestern situation? BD, did you see this coming? You never seemed as high on Coach Fitzgerald as others appeared to be.
I've never cared much for him, honestly. I've heard a lot of stories about his dislike for Notre Dame. And it just rubbed me the wrong way. It just seemed very petty. And it's like, get over yourself, dude. You were a multi-time All-American. You won the Butkus Award. Like, why are you still crying about not getting into Notre Dame? Like, just stop. I never heard anything about him being a bad guy because I never cared enough to ask. But he just kind of seemed like someone I just wasn't fond of. I never saw, like, I didn't, I'm like, oh, I think secretly he's allowing this basically sexual assault to happen on players in the locker room consistently. I mean, that's what, like, a buddy of mine was like, is this really that big a deal? And I'm like, yeah, it's a big deal. It's a very big deal. You know what I mean? Like, this is, first of all, it's against people's will based on what we're being accused of. And people say, well, he didn't know. Then that's even, that to me, that's worse.
That's worse.
Because as far as your ability to keep your job.
Correct.
Right. They're both bad. But the fact that you had so little control over your football team, and everybody says like, he was very in control of football. Then I definitely don't believe that you didn't know.
Then he knew. I
Right?
mean, it can't be both.
Right.
Right? It can't be both.
Right.
Either you have control and you
Right.
knew, or you
Because this
don't have
isn't something
control
that
and you
happened like
didn't.
one year during camp, and you had this group of.
Right.
Because you'll get this, Vince. You'll have this group of veterans that are just a bunch of d bags. I mean,
Sure.
and every team
Absolutely.
will have that, and they
Yep.
just do things. You're like, dude, this isn't who we are. And then eventually, when you finally find out about it, like later that year in the offseason, you're like, well, I'm glad that guy's gone.
Right.
But you find out about it. This is something that supposedly happened like during some of these kids that report us their whole career. There's
Right.
no way you don't know about that. There's no way
Exactly.
you don't know about that.
Exactly. Then
No
they said
way.
that there was like lists hanging on the wall and
Yeah.
like come on, man. Like,
And if you didn't know, then you're not doing your job.
correct.
You
That's
don't
more of
have
an
a good
indictment
leadership
on.
structure.
Yep.
You don't have a good accountability structure.
Right.
All that stuff. So I just it's a bad look.
Right.
And I didn't want to comment on it at first because hazing, especially in this culture where we're very, let's just say this, we're a very sensitive society,
It's a good word.
right? And use it that way. So I'm thinking like they made some kid who had long hair shave his head, and like he's pissed and you hazed me. That's not hazing. That's
Right.
you made some kid sing on in front at one of the team things, and that's not hazing. That's team. I mean, that's team
It's
bonding in some
initiation.
ways, right?
It's
Exactly.
initiation. Like,
And I'm okay with that. I never. I mean, in college, I never believed in that. Like we're in college now. Like right, we can grow up. This isn't high school anymore. But like whatever. It is what it is.
Right.
Like, and if it was that, it's like, okay, whatever. Hey, coach, don't do that anymore, and you move on. But then there's other types of hazing we've heard about that is really bad. Kids having instruments inserted into body parts. You don't want, you should have a choice on whether or not something gets inserted into there. You know what I mean? Like you hear about this appalling stuff, and it's like there's these two varying degrees of what people consider hazing.
Right.
Like I don't view this as hazing. I view this as assault.
Right.
Right? Like that's the way I look at it. Like this isn't hazing. Hazing is you make all the freshmen get buzz cuts.
Right.
You make the freshmen sing at the talent show, right? You make a freshman stand up and sing in the cafeteria during fall camp. Okay, that's hazing. It's like whatever. We're in college. We shouldn't have to do that. But like whatever. It is what it is. That's hazing.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't hazing. This is like such an inappropriateness that it's just like I don't even like what kind of culture did you create that you had a team full of veterans that thought this was okay
Right.
in this era, in this day and age, that you thought that was okay to do in your like that's not hazing, man. You know what I mean? Like Vince, that's not team bond. Hazing is meant to be some sort of like you said, you used the right word. It's an initiation
Right.
that we all kind of go through. Like when you
Mhm.
join the Marine Corps, what first thing you do, right? Right. I mean, that in
Right.
every movie that has Marine Corps, it's one of the first scenes. They all show that scene, right, where they
Yep.
all get their hair cut off, right? Okay, whatever. It is what it is. This isn't. That's not hate. That's hazing.
Right.
This is not hazing,
Agreed.
in my opinion. This is assault. I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, Vince, because
No, I'm with you. I always take a pause when I hear people being accused of quote unquote hazing, because I do think that we are overly sensitive as a community, as a nation, as a whatever,
Right.
however you want to phrase it, right?
Stuff
And
that people view as like, oh, that's so bad. I'm like,
yeah,
it's
no, it's not.
part of being a teenage boy. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, yes,
exactly.
Yes,
I would love to talk about the things that happened to me as a freshman in high school, et cetera. Right. Like it is what it is. And I'm not mentally scarred or anything like that. And nothing was against the law or anything like that. And that was hazing. Like you got hazed as a
Right.
freshman, and that's what it was. Right. So I always hesitate, and I want more information before I jump on the bandwagon of hazing. Right.
Right.
In this particular situation, what happened was illegal. Like you can't, that's not allowed. You can't do that. And the buck stops with the head coach.
Right.
And
If it's going on for years. Yes.
correct. Absolutely.
Right. Because sometimes, Vince, something can happen that you find out about, but you don't find about till the off
Because
season.
maybe it was off campus and it's something that, you don't have a purview on. I get
Or
that.
the kids that didn't like it didn't tell you until they transferred out after the year.
Right.
But where a coach can't not know is when it goes on for years.
Correct.
And this supposedly happened for years.
Right. This was part of the program. I mean,
Yeah.
this was the atmosphere. This was the, this is what they created. I mean, whether he initiated it or not, it comes down to two things for me. He either knew about it and didn't say anything, didn't stop it, you get fired.
Mm-hmm.
Or he didn't know about it, which means he has no control over his program, you get fired.
Bingo.
Like it leads to the same conclusion. And so when he was fired yesterday during the show, Sean and I's show, it didn't surprise me at all.
Right.
I was not surprised in any way, shape, or form.
I was actually surprised because I thought they'd find a way to protect him. Honestly, okay. I thought they would, because he's considered sometimes a little bit bigger than the institution, and you're even seeing it now. Like there are still people defending him. Yeah. Oh, I can't believe the president hasn't come out publicly. Like Adam Rittenberg at ESPN's like, he's made some comments. I'm like, dude, I feel like this guy's like trying to defend Fitzgerald here.
Yeah.
Like he put out the whole team said that, oh, so the kids accused basically of borderline rape are saying they didn't do it. Well, that's the first. Well, they must be true. It must, you know what I mean? Like they're not,
The president doesn't have to come out and say anything. He made his statement by firing the head coach.
Press conference. Yeah, exactly. Well, I can't believe he wasn't in the Zoom meeting. Dude, the players, I don't owe y'all anything. You guys are the ones that did this. I don't owe you a dang thing.
Exactly.
Which is kind of weird. I mean, I think a president should do that just because, again, you're the leader. You need to step up and say,
that's leadership.
Hey, this is going to happen. We're getting rid of the coach. We're going to find a replacement. And it's up to you guys to make sure this never happens again in your locker room. Correct. If you want to stay at Northwestern, if you want to be part of this program, you need to make sure that this is not happening. Because at the end of the day, that's the culture you're trying to create. Where if some knucklehead that's a D-bag wants to try to start doing some of this kind of hazing, the other veteran walks up and is like, you do that again, and you and I are going to step into the shower and handle some grown folk business, and you're not going to like it. Right. You know what I mean? As like someone like some kid at Notre Dame does that in 2012 in Manti, or Tyler Eifert or Zach or Capron Lewis Moore grabs that guy and says, you ever do that again? Mm-hmm. Right. You're going to feel some fire, right? It's this and this right here. Right. I mean, that's basically what it's going to come down to. If you want to be part of this team, don't never do something like that again. Right. But you didn't have that type of leadership and culture because this was apparently deemed okay. And a lot of these players are like, yeah, there's nothing wrong. It's just part of who we are. It's part of coach making us men. No, that's not making you a man.
No, that's not.
That's not making you a man. That's making you a clown is what that is. Right. So
yep, I'm with you.
Yeah. So anyway, somebody said maybe the shower's not the right place. Yeah, I didn't say you go in there naked. I mean, but
it's just an isolated area where you can take care of business. That's what that is.
Exactly. Yeah, no cameras.
Correct.
What's the one place you can't have cameras in a
locker room / shower area?
Yeah, well, you can have maybe in the locker room, maybe. Depending on
that's a stretch. Yeah.
What depends on what kind, if you're talking about the locker room and like where you work out and practice every day, no. But if you're talking about like the game locker room where maybe kids aren't,
they're doing game speeches and stuff.
But because you're going to have people not wearing clothes, you just don't have cameras there. But you definitely don't have cameras in the shower, and that's why you handle your business with discipline of your team in the shower area. But yeah, that's kind of why you do it. But yeah, I was pretty appalled by it, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sorry. This is an easy decision.
Right. And it's me. I mean, it's homophobic, right? Because you're trying to shame these guys by putting them in uncomfortable, you know what I mean? Like,
sure.
Ooh, this is do this. And it came across that way as well. And like you're making a kid take a snap from center from another naked dude. Like, what are we doing here? Like, I don't know what kind of homoeroticism you got going on back in your dorm, but don't bring that in the locker room, right? We're here to play football. We're here to be, we're here to do this. It's just freaking weird.
Yeah.
It's just like, what the heck, man? Like that, like the one thing we did in high school that I thought was stupid, and I never did it when I was a veteran, but like when you were a freshman, you got like, they would chase you around the hallway. You had to try to escape. Otherwise they'd not consider you a man. It's just really weird and stupid. And then they take a broomstick and they smack you in the butt as hard as you could. I'm like, this is stupid. Like, what the hell are we doing here? Mm-hmm. But like, it was dumb, but it was kind of like, okay, you get a little welt in your butt and you move on. Like, I thought it was weird, whatever.
Right.
Like when you start getting into some of this stuff, it's just, what is wrong with you? Like, who thought of this?
Right.
Like, what's going on in your freaking head that this was kind of, hey, what can we do to, build team bonding? Oh, I know what we can do.
Right.
We can all, it's just like, what? I then looked at the dude that brought that up. I'm like, what is wrong with you? Like, this is why we suck. This is why we're 3-9 every year. Because you're spent, it's like,
because this is where your head's at.
Right. And then the one year they were good is the year they didn't have an offseason together. They couldn't be around each other. That's the only year they've been good in the last few years is when they couldn't be around each other all offseason. So that their version of team building didn't take into effect in that offseason. You know what I mean? So it just was freaking weird. It's just freaking weird. So I'm glad he's fired. And honestly, I have no sympathy for him because you either A, were derelict in your duty to control your football team because you didn't know about it, or B, you did know about it and I highly doubt that Pat Fitzgerald was like, yeah, do that.
Right.
But he had this sort of my thought as far as him knowing was more of a
don't ask, don't tell kind of a thing.
Yeah, but more of a I'm letting the players build the culture.
Yeah, right.
You know, that's stupid.
So maybe he didn't know all the details, but he knew something was
right. Even if he knew the details, but it's like, I don't like it, but hey, if it's what the leaders think is going to build team unity, that's dumb ignorance as well. But either way, it's like you're done.
You didn't do your job. Sorry.
Right.
And good luck getting a new one.
Yeah. Ridiculous. All right, let's move on from that because
let's do that. James O'Reilly. Can't wait to watch the show tonight. Coach, we all know your feelings about Cole Mullins being very underrated. Same with Benjamin Morrison. I was wondering, did you have an underrated player from the 23 class?
So like a guy that I just was like, this guy's going to be good. And I don't care what anybody says. He's going to be special. Well, I mean, I guess one you could kind of point to, Vince, is Kenny Minchie. He wasn't ranked super high, and I thought he was a top 100 guy. I flat out thought he was a top 100 guy. I'm pounding on the table for Kenny Minchie to be a top 100 player. So he would probably be my one from 23. Some of the other guys that I thought were very underrated were rated high at some point. Like Drake Bowen and Jaden Osbury were both top 100 guys when they committed to Notre Dame. Like they were borderline 5-stars when they committed. And then of course, now that they're committed to Notre Dame, they fall down the rankings and blah, 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 blah. Right. So, but they weren't, that was different. Yeah. Benjamin Morrison was never ranked very high. Cole Mullins is never ranked very high. So, but even Kenny Minchie, Vince, to a degree, is like, I don't know if that's a good one either, because there was a couple people that had Kenny Minchie very high. I mean, SI All-American had him ranked in the top 100, but that was because of me, primarily. I mean, I pushed for that. John Garcia agreed with me, but I pushed for that. But he was a consensus top 250 guy. So I don't know if I can use him either after senior year because of what he did at the Elite 11 in his junior season. So I'm looking at that, man. I don't know if there was a lot of guys like that just, man, I know this guy's going to be a dude because they were, Jeremiah Love was ranked high. Braylon was ranked high. Sure. Jaden Greathouse was ranked high. Maybe Sam Pendleton. That might be one. I would like to say Joe Otting, but I can't say him because he needs to fill out, and I'm not sure if that's going to happen. Whereas that's not a concern for me for Cole Mullins and Benjamin Morrison. That's not a big issue. So Joe Otting, Sam Pendleton, maybe a guy like that. Those are the ones that I'd probably say for 23. But yeah, I didn't really have a guy like that because most of the guys that I love, like everybody knows I loved Jaden Osbury in that class. But when he committed to Notre Dame, he was like 5-star by one of the services and was like a consensus top 100 guy. So, you got to be an idiot not to see that he's a top 100 guy, or biased because he committed to Notre Dame now. And so let's drop him out of the top 100. So good question. Good question. This is more of a comment from Patrick King. So we'll just read his comment and you can give your thoughts if you want, or we can just move on. But Patrick's a big fan of Anthony Knapp.
Yeah. As a black horse, I like Antoine Knapp. Will be 6'5", 290. Has Anthony. Attitude. Oh, I got
it's just spelled differently. I knew why because Antoine looks like that at the end.
Yes, it does. I read it quickly.
All good, buddy.
Will be 6'5", 290. Has a bad attitude in a good way. Stone hands. Watch the film and great feet. I see why Rudolph backed him right guard.
I don't see him as 6'5". We have seen him up close. Ryan I just don't think he's 6'5". I don't know that he has the length that people said. I do think he has good feet. I do think he has very strong hands. And I do think he plays with a good demeanor, which is the bad attitude part that he's talking about. I'll say this, Patrick. I hope you're right, and I hope Drew Rudolph is right. I do. I don't see it yet in him, but I hope you guys are right. Definitely. That's one of those ones we're going to learn about Joe Rudolph as an evaluator. If Anthony Knapp is what Patrick and Joe Rudolph think he's going to be, they'll say, okay, Joe Rudolph knows his stuff. He does.
Guns and Buns says the odds of the starting O-line is the same at the end of the season. Ooh,
Well, barring injury.
Barring injury, I think.
Yeah, I would
sure.
say I'd probably say there's a 60% chance of that right now. That would be where I'm at. So better than 50-50. I don't. So I'm not guaranteeing that there's going to be a change. I'm not guaranteeing that there's going to be a guy beat somebody out, Vince. So 60% is probably 60-40, I would say right now.
Yeah,
and it also depends on who wins the starting job, right? Because if let's say Rocco wins the starting job in the fall, there's still a danger because what if he doesn't play as well in games as he doesn't practice?
Right.
Like there's that kind of thing.
Right.
So even if the guy that you consider is, because I think when we all think of this, we all think Kristofic starts and then eventually Rocco takes over.
Right.
What if Rocco starts and he's inconsistent and doesn't play well, and then all of a sudden, then
you put
Andrew steps in. So
I
still, either way, I still view it as a situation where I'm not certain that the guy that starts the season at guard is going to stay there.
That's fair.
I hope it does.
Yeah,
I hope there's that consistency.
I mean, the thing you want is consistency, all right? I mean, or continuity, I should say. That's a better word for this. I want continuity. I would love for the starting five to be the starting five at the end of the year. But I understand your uncertainty when it comes to the right guard spot for multiple reasons. So, yeah, I think 60-40 is a good spot to put it at.
Right. This is another guard question here, Vince, I love this name, Indie Football Nerd. That's a cool name. Like, that's a fun name.
So I was trying to look at his avatar, but anyway. Is that it's
from the it looks like the 05 game is what it looks like.
Okay.
Either the 05 game against USC or the 06 game against Army. Those are the two green jersey games they had when Brady was there.
So, mailbag question. Of your current projection of who the starting guards will be in 23, who has more power, the starting tackles or the starting guards?
So this is basically if Rocco and Billy are guards, what's the more powerful duo? Him Billy and Rocco, or Blake and Joe Alt? I would say the guards, because I don't know that Blake's as powerful as he was when he was 330, and he didn't show it last year anyway. I mean, he showed some power, but not the kind. And then Joe's not a power player. Joe is more physical than people think, but I wouldn't call him
But he's a finesse type player, yeah.
I don't even know that I'd say that. No? I just don't know that he's a power guy. I think he's more Liam Eichenberg than he is Mike McGlinchey.
Okay.
Like Liam Eichenberg wasn't he was blowing people up like McGlinchey was. Like, to me, Ronnie Stanley was a finesse player. I don't think that Liam Eichenberg was a finesse player, even though he wasn't a mover. He wasn't just a butt kicker. He did his job and he So I understand where you're coming from an end result standpoint. I just think he's a little bit more physical than that, but I don't know if he's like everybody at their best. Like, is okay. It's like this: if they're all at their best, who's the most physical?
It's the guards,
right? Who has the most power of the individual players?
Yes, just like raw strength, power.
Of the five, who would you say if they're all reached their full potential? Who would you say is the most powerful?
Rocco.
I'd say if they're all reached their full potential, I'd say Blake.
Okay.
But then my number 2 and my number 3 are the two guards.
Okay.
I'd actually put Billy second and Rocco third. You could make a case for Rocco second. But Blake's not the build he was before. But let's say Blake comes out and he's 320 this offseason, right? But at 310, he's not even number 1. He's probably number 2 or 3. And then I'd probably put Joe at the bottom. But again, he's good. It's just I think those other two kids are more powerful. So I'd say the guards.
Okay, that's a good question.
I would say the guards.
A fun way to look at it.
Yeah. This is funny. We needed a funny one today, and this is a funny one.
From DT Troll Hunter.
Yeah.
I say this wrong every time, by the way. Which O-line player would make the best cannonball splash? Well, you got to go with the width, right? So it's got to be.
It's more like the circumference, right? I mean, isn't that kind of what you're looking for?
Yeah.
So and then overall weight.
Yeah.
I'd probably have to say Charles Jagasol right now. Probably he's 320. Him or Rocco, maybe Rocco, one of those two guys.
Because Rocco's a little bit more compact, wide. Like he's going to make the biggest impact. I feel like. Yeah.
Yep. I think so. I think we agree on that one. Here we go.
Tyler Evans with the super chat. Thanks so much, Tyler. Really appreciate it. Just got on. I don't know if you guys talked about this, but can I get your take on Northwestern?
Yeah. Tyler, I don't want to dive back into it. I appreciate the super chat. We talked about it. It was like 2 questions ago. Basically, we held our opinions until we had more specifics of, even when he got the 2-week suspension, I didn't say anything because I was like, okay, is this a 2-week suspension that's because of PC culture. You have to do it just to slap on the wrist because you can't not do anything. And so whatever, you don't have him. Guy making $5.7 million goes 2 weeks in the offseason without pay. No big deal. Whatever.
Right.
So, because he, some kid who has long hair and thought that is his identity, had to have his head shaved. It's like, okay, whatever. Like, don't do it again, or move on. Or was it something more extreme, like some stuff we heard about that went on at Penn State, in recent years and things like that. And that's the other thing is like some of the stuff that you heard about that happened at Penn State, like under James Franklin, I'm not talking about stuff that happened with Sandusky and Joe Turner. I'm talking about stuff that we've heard has happened at Penn State. James Franklin got to keep his job. So I'm curious if like things like that get investigated or not. But, to me, when we heard what we heard, it was like, yeah, he needed to be fired.
Yeah, exactly.
He has no control over his program, no matter what the truth of is he knew or didn't. Like him knowing, to me, when you heard about what happened and then the time frame, the length at which it happened over multiple seasons, he either needed to be fired because he didn't have control of his program, or he needed to be fired because he knew and didn't do anything to stop it. Either way, you lose.
The end result is the same. Yeah.
Yep. I agree. So I just wanted to answer that just because, as brief as possible. If you want to get further into it and sort of my rant about it, you can go back and listen to what we talked about before.
Number one ND fan, can this line win the Joe Moore Award?
In short, yes, they're certainly capable of it.
Right.
Am I predicting it right now? In my bold prediction, yes. And just a normal, okay, if I'm doing like my season predictions of the entire college football landscape, is Notre Dame going to be the team that I predict to win the Joe Moore Award? Probably not. I'm probably looking like Georgia. I mean, Michigan, hey, you're the champs till somebody beats you, right? They got a pretty good team coming back. And, so you look at teams like that, and maybe Bama this year with year two of their new coach and some talented young player, so there's some people there. But do they have a shot to win it? Absolutely. Now, bold prediction wise, where we're having a little bit of fun. Yeah. Then you get into events where you're like, okay, yeah. I'm going with Notre Dame, baby. Right.
Absolutely. They could definitely be a finalist. And, winning it is another level, obviously, but that'll be fun to watch.
Yep. All right. Here's a super chat from Raymond Harton.
Woo! Raymond, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope A. Carter can be a dude for us this year. Where do you see Micah Bell fitting in with his speed? What kind of size does he have? Thank you, guys.
I think he's about 5'10", 5'10 and a half is what he kind of looks. But to me, early on, I think nickel is where I really like Micah Bell, where he can just run like a Tariq Bracy type of guy. But as his career goes on, I think more of like that field corner position, just somewhere where he can open up and run, because that kid is fast. But the other place I'd love to see him fit in, Vince, is his kick returner. Like, I'd love to see that speed return at kicks.
Kick returner is such a great spot for young guys just to unleash their speed, and it's a great opportunity for them to get on the field. I think that's a great spot for him. And there's a lot of candidates, in my opinion, for punt return and kick return.
Yeah, I mean, Jadarian Price, Jeremiah Love.
And none of them have to be starters.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Flores, Jaden Greathouse. Christian Gray. I mean, there's a lot of those guys. Absolutely.
Yeah, you can be dynamic back there by not putting starters back there.
Absolutely. And then, of course, a guy that already has a touchdown under his career, Chris Tyree, that kind of guy too. So there's a lot of options. A lot of options.
Yeah. I'm hoping Chris Tyree is being used too much on the offensive side to be in the kick return team.
Agree, because you and I agreed on this last year. If Chris Tyree becomes the guy on offense, then you take him off a kick return.
Right.
And I say the same thing this year. If he's going to be playing 30-some snaps a game, I'd say just take him off kick return.
Because it's not like he's the only option back there. I mean,
and you don't even get a lot of chances. It's like just wasted practice. Go get him on the jug. Like, I would have Chris Tyree down in the jugs machine during every special teams period.
Just catching balls.
Yep, that's it.
Just catching balls.
That's it. And I'd be doing like just the different things to work on.
Absolutely.
Like I'd be having him down there doing low ball catching drills, things like that. I would absolutely would do it. And it's not that he can't return kicks anymore. It's just that I need to get you mastered. I need to get you to master this stuff.
And look, a worst case scenario, something happens to somebody or multiple somebodies and he has to go in there and return a kick. Guess what? He could do it without a whole lot of practice. I mean, he's good at it.
Right.
Justin Knox, if we have a Joe Moore quality offensive line, why do we care about any defensive line? I mean, any defensive line. That includes getting Audric putting you on your butt.
Well, they won the Joe Moore Award in 2017 and got beat by Georgia. Couldn't run for 100 yards, couldn't run the football. So that's why. I mean, the Joe Moore Award doesn't go to the team that had a perfect game all 12 weeks, right? It's hey, we were dominant. We had this one bad game or that bad game, which everybody has. But, it's just the overall dominance over the course of the year. They can do that and just not match up well against Ohio State and not play well. Well, guess what? That could be the difference between you being a playoff team or not.
Right.
And so it matters because you've got to also know here's who our best opponents are and who we're really making sure we're on top of our game for. Like I've never been someone that felt like it was smart to overlook opponents, like to convince yourself that everybody you played sucked. I think it's unwise. I don't think that makes a lot of sense at all. Or I'm not worried about anybody because we're so-and-so. Well,
right.
I mean, Notre Dame in '88 didn't fear Miami, but you sure as heck respected who Miami was, which is why they knew they had to bring it, and the way that they did. So I think that's why you should care about any defensive line and who your matchup is, because that's going to be the battle, especially the Ohio State line, because they whooped your butt last year. I mean, that's going to tell me where your pride is as a unit, right? I mean, you can just out-talent your first four opponents. But if you don't go out there and just play your absolute butt off against Ohio State, then that tells me maybe you don't have the internals that I hope that you had, right? Yeah. That was the issue that I had with Ohio State last year against Michigan. Like, how do you get beat by Michigan, let their team and their coach and their fans talk trash about you for a year and pretend like they didn't duck you the year before and use, COVID as the reason they didn't want to play? No, they didn't want to get murdered by 70 points. That's why they didn't play Ohio State the year before, right? If we're being real about it. But it just comes down to you did not play like a team that had a chip on your shoulder. You play like a team going through the motions. Like, where's your heart? Where's your soul? Like, where's your pride?
Mm-hmm.
And so if Notre Dame's offensive line doesn't have we got something for you. We got something for you this year. Then that's going to make me question if their leadership and if their offensive line coach is really, because again, Vince, you don't want them to get so amped up that they don't play well that way. But it's that way the good coaches can kind of find a way to get that. Hey, you know what? Like this is why they beat your butt last year. Well, you want to act like that? This is why they beat your butt last year. You know what I mean? Like challenge them a little bit. Like, okay, I'm just sick of coach talking about how they kicked. That's like, what was it? Lou Holtz. Remember that? It was a '93 where they played the tomahawk chop the whole time. I know they talked about this in 2014 as well, where they were so sick of that tomahawk chop that when they heard it in the game, it's like it pissed them off and they wanted to go. And that's why a Notre Dame team took the defending national champs down to the wire the way that they did, because they had a little bit of a chip on their shoulder. You know what I mean? And it's like football is psychological, man. I mean, if you're a coach and you can't get in your kids' heads and know how to properly motivate them and focus them and bring them all together, then you're not going to be a great coach. You may have great scheme and you may know football really well, but that's the difference to me, Vince, between the great coaches and the not great coaches. Is not, I know a mess of football, but can you mentally
get the best out of your kids at 100%. Tough times?
100%.
Yeah.
That's what makes Mike Elko so good. It's not just, Mike Elko's not successful as a D coordinator at Wake and Notre Dame and other places, and now turning a 3-9 Duke team into a 9-win team because scheme-wise, he's the smartest guy in the room. Now, look, he's pretty smart, but he knows how to get the most out of his players. He knows how to bring a team or a unit together and get them all going towards a single purpose.
Right.
And know how to get them, fired up in different levels for different games. That's what makes the best coaches, in my opinion. So, yeah. Here we go.
Joseph DeJager. What about Charles Jagasaw? Maybe mid-season?
Maybe. Maybe. I if he's good enough, put him in there. I don't care if it's guard, tackle, wherever. Right. If he's ready to play, he's ready to play. Yeah, I think it's going to be tough because the guys in front of him are really good. Like there was a question down here from Timeout Tom. He said, while Jagasaw is an exceptional talent, to expect him to play as a freshman is unrealistic unless because of injury. I could almost guarantee he'll redshirt in his freshman year. I don't know why you would make that comment, Tom, because just look at Notre Dame's recent history.
Yeah.
You had
more
Steve
so
Elmer.
now. You could make that comment 5 to 10 years ago.
Not even. I get what you're saying, Vince, but like 2017, Robert Hainsey didn't play because they needed him to or because of an
Right.
injury. He
forced
just
his
was
way
that
onto the
good. He
field.
was ready to
Yeah.
play. You look at Joe Walt, last year, or I mean, excuse me, not Joe Walt, but Blake Fisher in 2021. He didn't start as a true freshman because of injury. He started because he was the best guy at the position. Now,
Sure.
it's a little harder for a true freshman to do that now, to your point. But like 2017, we talked about 2013. Steve Elmer started several games. But even though Steve didn't start until an injury or in poor play, he was playing early in the year. He was in the rotation early in the year. So we've seen this before. This is not new at Notre Dame. A freshman coming in and playing on the offensive line not because of an injury. So am I predicting Charles will play? No. I mean, there's some good players ahead of him, but to say it's unrealistic, I think is going too far in the opposite direction, if that makes sense. Like
Sure.
just saying, oh, he's going to come in and start as a freshman. That's a little bit of a slap in the face of the guys already there. Now, look, he's the highly ranked guy and all that, but these guys are pretty flipping good too. You know what I mean? But then this comment to me is sort of the extreme to the opposite end, if that makes sense, Vince.
I think a lot of things have to come into play for a true freshman offensive lineman to play.
Sure.
Right? Obviously, you have to be very, very talented. That goes without saying. But it's also, what does the depth chart look like? Is there an opening to get onto the field? Or are you just so freaking good that you just bypass everybody?
Or so advanced technically with like Robert Hainsey, right? I mean, he was so advanced technically that he was ready to play as a freshman.
Sure.
With Steve Elmer, he just was that good as a freshman compared to other guys. So I'm not predicting it, Tom, and your actual conclusion may end up being correct.
Sure.
But I think the no-brainer nature of the comment is really where I would somewhat disagree with you a little bit. Now, I always want redshirt freshmen, offensive linemen to redshirt, Vince. But for me, I don't think there's a reason to redshirt Charles Jagusah. If he's who you think he is, he's not a 5-year player.
Sure.
Right? So even if it means, hey, he's a starter on our tackle position on PAT field goal. Some people may look at that and say, why are you wasting year of eligibility on Charles Jagusah?
Because he's not going to be here for 5 years.
Because if Charles Jagusah is the player we think he's going to be, he's not a 5-year player.
Right.
Quentin Nelson wasn't a 5-year player. Ronnie Stanley wasn't a 5-year player. Liam Eichenberg was, but he didn't have this kind of God-given ability. Mike McGlinchey was because he was really raw.
Yeah.
Right. But most great linemen were not 5-year guys. Right. Robert Hainsey was a 4-year guy. I don't know that Robert Hainsey would have come back in 2021 if he had a 5th year because he was ready. So if Charles Jagusah is who we think he's going to be, he's not a 5-year guy. And so play him and then put him in because, and again, it doesn't necessarily prepare him to start, but like he's going to get a lot of on the field in big moments, getting a chance to play kind of situation. And then maybe by end of the year, if you do have, let's say you do have to throw him into the game against USC. What may be his first significant O-line moments, but he had to pass block, for that game-winning field goal against Ohio State. He's been in that clutch moment where I got to go do my job so
the
we can
lights
go
aren't
win
going
this
to be too
game.
bright. Yeah,
Bingo.
Exactly. Yeah.
Bingo.
And that's where special teams I'm expounding a little bit here, but like that's where special teams can be so effective for young guys. Can be so effective because you can get them on the field. It's limited reps, but you're getting them on the field in big moments, in front of the crowd, under the lights, whatever the cliche you want to use, but it gets them on the field. That I've always looked at special teams as an opportunity. If you earn your spot, we're not just going to put all young guys out there to put all young guys out there. If you earn a spot on that special team, it can really pay dividends in the future when you need them on offense or defense.
Yeah, I agree. Really good questions today. And again, Tom, I understand where you're coming from. This is not I don't think you're like, oh, this is stupid. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying I understand why you would say that because of the nature of the position. And then also, Charles had the offseason injury. And so I get where he's coming from. I think it's too extreme to just guarantee that he's not going to play. I think that undersells Charles's talent, just guaranteeing he's going to come in and no problem I think undersells the guys that you just assume he's going to beat out ability. So I think those are two extremes. I don't expect him to come in and start right away. I hope he plays. I would get him in as much as I could, to be honest with you. And then, because to your point, Vince, if you're in a situation next year where 4 starters are gone because you were so good in 23, do you really want Charles Jagusah to be going down to Allen, down to Kyle Allen Stadium against A&M And
with
that's the first time he's ever played a meaningful snap in his life.
Snaps. Yeah, exactly.
You know, if you have a choice, I would say I'd rather not do that.
Yeah. Andre, with a mailbag question. Notre Dame needs nutritional table for all athletes. This will help them realize their potential fitness level and goals. They have training table.
They have it to a degree. I think my issue has always been it needs to be a lot better, but they do have it. They do have a nutritional table now. It's just not to the degree that I think it needs to be. And I think there's a lot of assumptions based on things that Brian Kelly has said. And the fact that they were late getting this, that there's this assumption that Notre Dame doesn't have a nutrition table or nutrition plan. They do. It just needs to be upgraded significantly, in my opinion, Vince. And I think they needed one of the renovations to the Goog needs to be where all your meals can be prepared there.
Sure.
Right. That's a part of it as well.
Right. Because they have a nutritionist on staff. They've got, all of that. They eat at the Goog. They do all of that. It's more of a pain in the neck for the people preparing the meals to prepare it off site, bring it over, set it up, set the tables up, take the tables down. Like that's the bigger issue, right? Because they just don't have a specific place to do all of that within that building. So that does exist. They eat their meals there. The football players aren't going to the dining hall. That it used to be that way. It's not that way anymore.
Well, actually, I think they have to for some meals. Not because the one thing I've been told is not all their meals are prepared at Notre Dame. I think it's like only one, sometimes two.
Okay.
And that's part of it. And that because it's hard to 3 times a day ship across campus a meal. So yeah. So I do think there's room for improvement, Andre. And the same thing with like the nutrition aspect with supplements. From my understanding, talking to different people, is Notre Dame's a little behind in some of that stuff of what they're allowed to do and are not allowed to do, like what they have the resources to do. So there's some things where it's definitely better than it was, but it's not where it needs to be. That's still the constant complaint that I hear is like kids will get that meal at Notre Dame, but then they still are eating dinner at their house. And this is as recently as a couple years ago.
Sure.
So certainly something that, especially during the off season. During the season, it's a little better, Vince. During the off season is when it becomes more of a problem. Because during the season, I think they're eating after dinner, after practice and stuff like that.
Right. Because that was always like the knock. It was like players were hustling out of practice to get to the dining hall before it closed. Like I don't think that's the problem anymore.
No,
I don't see that being
not in season, but in the off season it is because they're not getting as much. From what I'm told, now I could be wrong on that. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I still believe it's just still not to the degree that it needs to be.
Guns and buns. Does Hartman's experience have a bigger impact on the offensive line, or does the offensive line have a bigger impact on Hartman? Chicken to the egg, Brian.
I think the O-line is going to have a bigger impact on Hartman. I don't know that Sam Hartman's going to necessarily do anything that's going to necessarily make the O-line better. I think you could argue if the answer was if you replace O-line with run game, then I think you could say Sam Hartman will have a bigger impact on the run game. You could at least make that case. But either way, I would probably still go with the run game, or in this case, the O-line, because you know who Sam Hartman is, and he's going to give it protection. Right. But I would say that I think there's a expectation on my end that Sam Hartman's going to be a more efficient player than he was at Wake Forest, and he needs to be. Now, if all we get of Sam Hartman this year is the same exact dude he was the last 2 years, Notre Dame is really good.
Yes.
Really good. They're probably a 10-2, 11-1 team. Maybe even a run-the-table team. But if they're going to be a championship team, he needs to be better than what he was at Wake Forest, especially the consistency. You have this great game against Clemson, but then you throw like 2 pick sixes against Louisville, and you have a multiple turnover game, I think, against Duke and things like that, right? You can't have those. But that's, again, comes when you're having to carry the team week after week after week because your run game stinks and your defense stinks, then you're going to have games like that. So I still believe that having that run game is going to take a lot of pressure off Sam Hartman and allow him to be a more efficient quarterback.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I think you're absolutely right. I think he's going to be able to up his game because of the offensive line.
Right.
If that's – I think I'm not repeating what you're saying, but, I do think – that's the case. And I agree with you. He's going to have to play better, but he's going to be allowed to play better because of the offensive line. He's going to have more time He's gonna have more
Yeah.
time. He's gonna be able to make decisions. He's not gonna have to push the ball down the field blindly. And and the scheme is gonna help too. I mean, look, it just is. When he's doing that slow mesh behind an offensive line that's not as good as Notre Dame's, sometimes he's just chucking the ball, and that's where some of those
Right.
turnovers, happened, right? And
Right.
so I think the offensive line is just going to allow him to take his game to another level.
Yeah, I agree. All right, let's go to this one here, Vince.
Paul Hamilton, mailbag. What are your thoughts on Eli Manning as a quarterback? That's a interesting question. I mean, he won the Super Bowl twice. Was it because of Eli Manning, or was it more because of the team?
We've had this conversation before. I think Eli Manning was an outstanding NFL quarterback, and I know he was not a perfect one. He threw picks and was inaccurate and all that. But Eli Manning was a very good quarterback. Is he a Hall of Famer? I mean, I don't know about that. It is what it is. But he was an outstanding quarterback, and he beat Tom Brady twice, guys. That's not.
That's
that's not
that's
something
not nothing
to sneeze at, right?
That's not nothing.
And he had to play well in those games to win, right? And make some big plays late. And you say, well, that one guy made that great catch, but he had to throw it.
Well, and he got out of being sacked on that same play. Like, he got out of an absolute sack, was able to spin out of it and throw the ball down the field. So,
Yeah. So I don't know. I've always felt like there's this hate for, I don't say hate, this disrespect for Eli.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it is. I mean, the first Super Bowl that the second Super Bowl they played, that would be, was it 2012? Guy went 30 of 40 for 296 yards. It's pretty good in a win. And his receivers, and here's who he was throwing the ball to in those games, right? Hakeem Nicks, Mario Manningham, Bear Pasco. I don't even know who the heck that is. Victor Cruz, Ahmed Bradshaw, Harry Hinoski, Jake Ballard, and DJ Ware are the guys that caught balls from them in that game.
Yeah.
Right. His running back was Brandon Jacobs and Ahmed Bradshaw. Not exactly like two historic Hall of Fame running backs. Right. I mean, so, now the defense was very good, but again, Eli had to make the plays offensively for them to go down and win those games, because in both instances they were losing late in the game.
Yeah.
Right. So
I always felt like Eli gave them an opportunity to win a game. And that's,
And now there's times where Eli was part of the reason that they were losing in games, but you could kind of make that case about the Broncos at times too, right? I mean, so I don't know. I feel like Eli is a very good quarterback and does and gets some unnecessary I don't say hate, because I think that word is thrown around, to just disrespect. How about that as a player?
Yeah.
But is he a Hall of Famer? I don't think he was a Hall of Famer either, right? I mean, just winning Super Bowls doesn't make you a Hall of Famer. You have to have a level of greatness. And I don't know that I would ever say that Eli Manning was a top 3 or 4 quarterback in his generation, or even top 5 in his generation. And to me, I think you got to be that at least some point in time to be a Hall of Famer on top of rings.
You don't think he was ever top 5 in his, you don't think he was ever a top 5 quarterback while he was playing in the NFL?
No, especially not for a stretch. No, I don't. I mean, you got to think about the era he played in. So his entire career, Tom Brady was in the league.
Okay.
And for most of his career, his brother was in the league.
Okay.
Right. So right there, you're already kind of looking at it like, well, that's 2. Aaron Rodgers was in the league his entire career. He was in the same draft as Phillip Rivers and Ben Roethlisberger. And I'm not even sure if he was better than them. Right. I mean, at least not statistically, he wasn't. So, and there's other guys that kind of came along at different times as well. So what was Eli's rookie year? Like 04, 05?
Sounds right.
So let's find here. Let's find out when Eli. I think he was part of the 04 draft, right? So so he didn't start as a rookie. You go into the 2005 season. Eli finished his 5th in passing. The quarterbacks, I mean, you had Tom Brady, you had Brett Favre was with the Packers. I don't know if I'd put Brett Favre. Carson Palmer had a great year that year. His brother Peyton, obviously, that year. Yeah, Drew Brees was with the Chargers at the time. So maybe that year you could say Eli was a top 5 guy, maybe. 2006, you go to the regular season that year. Drew Brees' first year is the Saints. He's phenomenal. His brother was really good. Again, Carson Palmer, Tom Brady starting to emerge. Roethlisberger was pretty good. Eli finishes 11th in passing that year. I mean, threw 18 picks. Chad Pennington was pretty decent that year. Phillip Rivers was better than he was. I mean, so you can kind of go down the list and keep having that conversation. I mean, he played in an era, Vince, with Tom Brady, Drew Brees, his brother, Ben Roethlisberger, Phillip Rivers, Aaron Rodgers, and, Brett Favre at certain times early. So I don't know that I'd ever say he was one of the 5 best in his league. I mean, I don't believe Eli ever won an MVP, although, again, it could be an overrated thing, in my opinion. But just, I don't know that I could ever say maybe one year, maybe, where he was a top 5 guy. Outside of that, I don't know that he necessarily was, but he was a very good player. One thing, Ryan and I have some differences of opinion on specifically what specific players are Hall of Famers, but we have the same criteria. To be a Hall of Famer, there needs to be some really special stuff. Like it's not just like a lifetime achievement award of I played in the league for 30 years and I have put up a lot of stats, right? Like, okay, I don't care. Like, okay, cool that you were able to play long, but give me 3 years of Terrell Davis, that peak, which was special, over a guy that rushed for 12,000 yards because he was barely 1,000-yard rusher for a long time on an average 3.9 yards per carry. Okay, you just played a long time. Like Brandon Marshall, he's eligible for the NFL Hall of Fame this year, right? Play for the Broncos and like 5 other teams, right?
Yep.
If you look at his numbers, Brandon Marshall is a Hall of Fame guy, numbers wise. But would you ever consider Brandon Marshall an elite player? Or did Brandon Marshall spend a lot of his career playing in a pass-oriented league and he played for a long time? Like to me, that's more of how I look at it, is from that regard. I don't know if you agree or not with that, Vince, but I don't view him as a Hall of Famer. He had some very good seasons, but he played from 06 to 18. That's a long time. He had a bunch of years with 100-yard catches or 100 catches, but I mean, a lot of dudes caught 100 passes in that era. He played with Peyton Manning for, not Peyton Manning. Actually, I don't think he played. No, he didn't play with Peyton Manning. He was before Peyton Manning. But I don't know, man. I look at him and I just don't think greatness. I think really good, but I don't think greatness, right? Hall of Fame should be for guys that were really special, in my opinion, either for a long time or a very short period of time, like a Gale Sayers, that guy like that. That's my thoughts on it. All right, let's get to this one, Vince. This is another one from ND Football Nerd.
All right. He says, is it possible for the 23 guard combo to be better than the 22 combo?
Okay.
Sure.
That's a good one. Yeah. Vince, you want to take a crack at that and then I'll answer it and then you can.
Yeah, I would say that I think there's a really good chance that they could be better. Maybe not really good, because you're talking about 2 guys this year that are going to have less experience than the 2 guys last year. So you're talking veterans versus some new guys, right? But I think the ceilings are higher for these new guys than they were for that group. So if that makes sense, and and again, it depends on who the second guard is going to be this year. So that it's almost like 2 different questions, right? So if we're talking Billy Schrouth and Andrew Kristofic, I would take the 22 group. If we're talking Billy Schrouth and Rocco Spindler, that means Rocco beat out Andrew. I'm going to take the 23 group. Does that make sense? Like that's because I feel like the ceiling is higher for the 23 group as opposed to the 22 group.
Here's where I come on it, Vince, and this is the way that I look at this conversation. When I look at the 22 guards, like you said, I see veteran players. I see a level of consistency that they had. I see, Jarrett Patterson was a leader. I think that, Josh Lugg was a pretty steady player last year. I see guys that did their job. And in that regard, I don't think that the 2023 offensive guards are going to have that level of consistency, just the steadiness. I think we're going to see more up and down performances from that group. So if your standard for better is consistency, then I think they're going to have a tough time with that, even with the veterans around them. Now, they'll be aided a little bit by having a veteran center and veteran tackles, which the guards didn't have last year. They were the ones bringing along the tackles and the guards. So there's that's a little bit of a, narrows the gap a little bit in that regard. But here's where it comes to for me, and why, in my opinion, I do think that I do think that we could have a conversation about them being better. And that comes down to, I think the talent level and the power is significantly better potentially with the 2023 offensive guard position. Now, that means that, even though you may have some games you're like, man, you guys just too many mistakes there. It's a group where I could say, hey, man, boy, you just lined up behind that guy and he just blew a guy off the ball. Or, man, he was, Rocco or Billy was on this game and he was dominant in a way that we never saw from Josh Lugg after the injuries, a way we never saw from Jarrett Patterson last season at guard or even really at center. I could see that. And so if your standard is who had the more dominant performances, then I think the more dominant performances could come from this year's guards, especially if Rocco or Jagasaw or Ashton Craig takes those jobs. So if you want to talk about their high play is better than this group's high play, then sure, I think you could see the 23 guys being better. But I just think they're going to have a tough time with the consistency. So Vince, why you had to step out, basically comes down to, do you define better by consistency? If it's that, then it's 22 easily.
Sure. Yep.
If you define better as in just the moments of dominance, then I think we'll look at the 23 line as having more of that. Because Lugg and Patterson were never dominant. They just did their job,
correct,
snap after snap, and there's something to that, as we talked about earlier. If Rocco ends up being one of the – because I think if Kristofic is the starter at right guard, he'll basically just be a carbon copy of Josh Lugg. Basically, just go do your job, man.
Yeah.
Go battle. Just do your job. Do what you got to do.
I think that's fair.
And then it's Billy Schroth for Jarrett Patterson. Well, again, that's a tough ask. That's a 4-year starter that he's stepping in for. But again, I think the levels of top level play will be better, and that's where I think you'll see better play.
That's fair. Yeah, I like that.
All right, Vince, I'm gonna get to a couple of these that we're gonna get to. We're not gonna have time to answer all of them.
Okay.
Just because we're getting really long into the show. But I did want to get to a couple of these.
We're good at that.
Here's a good one here that I want to get to from Archer.
From Archer, our Ohio State fan. When the Notre Dame game isn't on, what college football player or team are you looking forward to watching? Ooh.
I mean, I try to watch a ton.
For you, because you watch a ton of football.
I mean, you know my setup during bye weeks.
Man.
I get all my computers upstairs, and I have like three computers, and then I have the TV in the background.
Right.
I have my laptop. I have to my wife's laptop. If she's not working if she's working up in her office, I'll take her laptop, and then I'll have and then I'll take a monitor and attach it to one of my laptops so I can get another game on that, and then I have the TV on. But it really comes down to what's the big game that week. That's the one I really watch.
That was going to be my answer too, 100%.
But the other thing I'll do too is I'll watch, like if Notre Dame's not on, I'll watch sometimes an upcoming Notre Dame opponent.
Right.
So like if we get out of the Central Michigan game and we go home that night and I don't even know, say USC's playing a night game, I'd probably watch USC play that night. Or Duke's playing a night game, or Louisville's playing a night game, or Ohio State's playing a night game. I'd probably watch that.
Yeah.
Unless it's like Bama LSU or Florida State Clemson or something like that. That's like, I can tell you this, the Saturday that Notre Dame travels to Stanford, if they have a night game, I know exactly what I'm doing at noon. I'm sitting down in front of my TV watching Ohio State, Michigan. That's just
absolutely
like, there's games like that they'll always be the go-tos.
Right.
But otherwise, is there a big game that's really interesting, or is a Notre Dame opponent playing? Those would be the ones that I'll look at.
It's the big game for me. So a lot of times when Notre Dame has an afternoon game, a 2:30 or 3:30 kick, we're doing the post-game show. I'll have my, iPad up on mute watching whatever the big night game is that night, right? Just kind of in the background. When Notre Dame's not playing, I'll try to, like, if it's a 3:30 start, I'll try to watch the first half of the noon game, because usually there's a big game at noon, right? I'll watch the first half of the noon game, then get in my car, and head over to the stadium or whatever the case may be. So I'm all about the matchups, the big matchups. And a lot of times we talk about those matchups throughout the week. And so I want to see if I was right when we predict and, those kinds of things. And so, one of the things we do as a staff is we predict, the big games of the week, right? I like to see if I'm going to be right, if I predicted it right, or if, where we're at and all that kind of stuff. So I'm a big game watcher. There's no doubt. Like, I don't have another team that I follow or another player that I follow unless it happens to be a player that I coached, something like that. I've had a couple of those throughout the years that I've wanted to turn on the set and watch, those guys. but yeah,
wasn't that the case wasn't there a kid from Purdue that you either coached against or something like that?
Well, there was Xander Horvath played at
Yeah.
Purdue.
Didn't you
He's
coach
out with the
against him or something like
Chargers.
that?
Yeah, he went to my high school where I went to high school, but then coached against him. Danny Pinner, who now plays for the Colts.
That's
he was at Ball State. So obviously watched him. Shaq Van was a running back. He went to Eastern Michigan, played at LSU, scored a touchdown to LSU Stadium. I thought that was pretty cool. So things like that, obviously if my kid ever plays, I want to watch him wherever he's at and whatever he's doing. So, but yeah, Notre Dame's by far my front and foremost, but I'm a big game watcher. I like the big games, see what's going on.
Here's an interesting one. So number one Notre Dame fan says LSU is a must watch. Unfortunately, got to root against BK. Okay, here's the scenario. Here's the scenario. Because I get this from a lot of Notre Dame fans. And it's going to be similar to Vince, to kind of what you and I have had conversations about in the past about Michigan, right? Where you'll say, I'll never root for Michigan. And I'll give you the scenario. But what if Michigan winning is going to have an impact on Notre Dame making the national championship or making the playoffs? So let's say you're in a situation this year where LSU, November 4th, is playing at Alabama. Let's say LSU has already lost to Florida State, already lost to Ole Miss, and a couple weeks before got completely upset by Auburn. Just hypothetically speaking.
So they got 3 losses.
They're 3 losses. They're out of the playoff.
They're out.
Or they already have 2 losses, and we know they're going to lose to Georgia in the SEC championship game. Bama's undefeated. They're ranked in the top 4. Notre Dame is currently undefeated, playing in the top, but all the teams ahead of Notre Dame are undefeated. Bama plays LSU. Bama's ahead of Notre Dame. Who do you root for?
Oh my God! I mean, obviously,
it's a no-brainer.
It's a no-brainer. You root for LSU.
I hate Brian Kelly. I mean, it's a no-brainer for me.
It's exactly right, because it benefits me as a Notre Dame fan.
But
for LSU to win, but
I know how hard that is for you. Same with Michigan.
Painful route, man. It's a painful route.
Like, let's say that Michigan's a 3-loss team this year, and Ohio State, Notre Dame beats Ohio State, but for whatever reason, Ohio State's ranked ahead of Notre Dame. And if Ohio State beats Michigan, then they're probably going to get in the playoff over Notre Dame. You root for Michigan.
Go blue.
I can't believe those words just came out of your mouth.
I know.
Like, whoa, we're ending the show right now. The apocalypse is coming. The skies just got dark. I don't know what's happening. The seals have been broken. Revelations is happening right now. Vince just said go blue.
It would be tough. I mean, and so I think the bigger question would be, okay, I know. Seriously, Archer, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. The bigger question would be, okay, taking Notre Dame out of the equation. Okay, Notre Dame's out, or they're already in. Let's say they're already in, just so we can be happy about it, right? So now it's somehow the gods have made it so that Michigan is facing LSU, and the winner goes to the playoff. Who you rooting for?
Yeah.
Or it has nothing to do with Notre Dame.
Here's a better one, Vince. It's a college football playoff. LSU and Michigan are playing against each other. Notre Dame's playing in the other playoff game.
On the other side.
Yeah. Do you root for Brian Kelly? Because, see, in that situation, I root for Brian Kelly.
Because I know he can whoop his butt because he's a mental coward.
Then they can beat Michigan, right?
Right.
And then Notre Dame can play Brian Kelly and beat Brian Kelly. So
yes, that would be golden. To beat Brian Kelly in the national championship game, that would feel pretty freaking good.
Ryan and I think we were talking about this last week. Maybe it was me and Brian Smith. I can't remember who, but it was more of I'd rather play BK in the playoff, the semifinal, because then he doesn't even get a playoff win.
Right.
Because that would be like sort of the ideal scenario. The perfect world scenario is you beat LSU in the semifinal game, so BK doesn't get a playoff win, and then you beat Michigan in the championship game.
Oh, yeah.
Would be the dream scenario.
That would be great.
Yeah.
That would be.
Yeah, that'd be a lot of fun. If that happened this year, think about it. You'd beat Ohio State, you'd beat USC, you beat BK, and you beat Michigan. That is the take me, Lord.
I was going to say, Notre Dame just needs to shut it down. Like, we're out. We're done.
Can't ever match this. It'll never be as good as this right now. So, all right. Here's some quick over-unders, Vince. I'm going to give to you
good.
from Mr. 2.0. Over-under, 1,200 rushing yards for Audric Estime.
Under.
Okay. Separately, over-under 500 rushing yards for Jadarian Price.
Ooh, that's a good one. I see. This is going to come down to is he the number 2 back? Does he make his way to being the number 2 back? If he does, I say over. If he does not, I say under. I know that's kind of an on the fence call. I think he's got a great shot at being the number 2 back, but if he is, I think he goes over.
All right, I'm going to say he's the number 2 back, and he's still under. Lastly, over under 700 all-purpose yards for Chris Tyree.
All-purpose yards. So does that include returns or just
all-purpose? Let's just go offense, receiving, and rushing.
Okay. Man, if he goes over that, then this is going to be one heck of a team. So I'm going to say under.
I'm going over.
Right.
I think he's going to be over. Yeah.
Okay.
For rushing and receiving, yes, I'm going to go
over
because I think he's going to have it's going to look a lot like Braden Lindsey in 2019. He's going to have a couple 50-yard runs on reverses like Braden had that year. He's going to catch a little now screen and just have a crease and just go for 60 yards. He's going to have some chunk plays. I think rushing and receiving gets him to that level.
Okay.
But all-purpose yards, I actually. We just gave the total offense answer. I think all-purpose yards would also include. Let me just look at this because this all-purpose running is a no-brainer. I mean, all-purpose. Chris Tyree was over 1,000 yards last year. That's why I changed the total offense.
Yeah,
because
that's over.
Because if he's the kick returner again, it's an easy one. I mean, he was over that last year.
Right.
Chris Tyree was 1,000-yard guy last year.
Right.
He was at 827 the year before that. I mean, he was at 1,000. Chris Tyree's had two. This is what's funny. He's had 2,000-yard seasons of all-purpose yards at Notre Dame already. Right? I mean, so, but the reason I'm saying that is because I think Mr. 2.0 is looking at it more from a total offense, which is rushing and receiving. Because all-purpose includes rushing, receiving, kick returns, punt returns,
everything,
all of it.
Anytime you got the ball in your hands,
right? Yeah. So I'm assuming Mr. 2.0 meant more just rushing and receiving is where it was coming from. Yeah. Yep. All right, let's see. Let's go this last one, Vince. This is going to be a fun one. Let's
okay, Chris Matz. If Notre Dame is undefeated after the Ohio State game, the Irish will finish blank.
Undefeated.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really believe that Ohio State is going to be for Notre Dame if they win. What I think this is going to sound weird. It's going to either be for Notre Dame what Stanford was in 2012, what Miami was in 1988, or it's going to be for Notre Dame what Miami was in 2017.
I knew you were going to say that. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep. It'll dictate the rest.
I'm not saying they're going to lose 41-8. I'm just saying that game will kind of demoralize them and they don't play well the next few weeks and that'll result in another loss.
Exactly.
Is what I'm saying.
Yep. And that's where from the earlier question about the most important part or whatever, right? Because if they get demoralized against Ohio State, then they got to go to Duke. That's not, and then they also have to go to Louisville the next week, and then they've got Southern. Right. If you lose to Ohio State and you can't pick yourself up after that, it could go
lose one of your next 3 games.
It could go a bad direction, is what I'm saying.
Right.
You know what I mean? But if you win that, can you imagine the confidence level that this team is going to have if they beat Ohio State at night, at home, to be 5-0 going into Duke, Louisville, and Southern Cal? You can't buy that kind of confidence. That doesn't, that's going to direct the rest. I think that game by itself, and say what you want to about Southern Cal and Clemson and all, whatever, the Ohio State game is going to direct this season.
Yeah.
No doubt in my mind.
Yeah. Look, we know they can beat Clemson. We've seen them do it multiple times.
Dominating Clemson,
seasons, right?
I mean,
we know they can beat USC. They've won 7 of the last 10. And even with the better coaching, Notre Dame was dumb plays away and a bad defensive game plan away from playing with, if not beating Clemson, USC last year. USC's not this unbeatable force, right? Notre Dame didn't even play that well. They had a bunch of dudes out. They didn't have their quarterback. They didn't have they're starting one of their corners. They didn't have their nickel corner. They were out a bunch of dudes in that game.
Right.
And still, to a degree, went toe-to-toe with USC. I've said this before. If Drew doesn't drop that ball in the first drive of the second half, it's 17-14, and that's a different ball game. Now, maybe USC still wins, but it's like Notre Dame takes a lead with
But
2
it's
minutes
different.
left, and Caleb,
Yeah.
Caleb Williams plays Superman and goes down the field and leads them to a touchdown. They still lose, but it's a much different game.
And it's a
And
much different perception coming out of that game
yes,
too.
100%, 100%. Where instead it's 17-7, you fumble, they go down and score, it's 24-7, and you're never really truly in that game again after that.
Right.
I'm worried about USC, meaning USC can beat Notre Dame. What I'm saying is that's not a game that I'm like, I don't know if they can win that game. I know they can. I have literally never been alive for a Notre Dame win over Ohio State. They've only played 5 times in my life, right? I mean, so that's part of it. They haven't played a whole lot. But I've been alive for Notre Dame beating Alabama a couple times, right? I've been alive to watch Notre Dame beat Clemson. I've never seen Notre Dame beat Georgia because we only played 3 times in my lifetime, right? I mean, so like it's partly that, but Notre Dame has played Ohio State enough in my lifetime to say this is just a team that has had Notre Dame's number. Not only they beat Notre Dame every time, the final scores have never really been all that competitive. Last year's was the most competitive game they played from a final score standpoint. Now, I know people that will argue that, I can't remember if it's the 95 or the 96, I think 96 game. Notre Dame was really outplaying Ohio State for like half the game, and then Ohio State rolled in the second half. I think it was the 96 game. But still, they won by double digits. The Fiesta Bowls were not competitive, right? I mean, they were the 05 Fiesta Bowl was competitive-ish. I think Zibikowski's fumble return would have tied it, right? Or maybe given Notre Dame lead, I forget. I mean, but Ohio State was the better team that day, right? I mean, they couldn't cover Santonio Holmes. Like, they just couldn't. But this is the game, Vince, that you say you slayed a dragon that you have never slayed.
Yeah,
I mean, you've never
exactly.
slayed before.
Right.
And, that just the confidence boost you get from that game. If you beat USC, it's like, okay, we're back on track against USC. You beat Clemson, you're like, yeah, again, right? We did that. We know we can beat you. Well, Ohio State's that team that you say, okay, this program's better than ours right now.
Right.
And they've whooped us, and now we have made a statement that we are back and we are a team that can play with anybody because we beat them.
Yes.
And that's a confidence booster that I think you need to be a championship team, in my opinion. Because now you do this, you go into the game against Georgia, and you're like, we have been more competitive against Georgia than we have been against Ohio State.
True.
Right. So I'm not worried about Georgia. You know what I mean? Like you should be. You get what I'm saying? Like, you're not afraid of them. You haven't been competitive against Ohio State for the most part. Right. And I think that's kind of where I come down to it. So yeah, sound like a plan.
It does.
Sound good.
Now I'm all excited for week 5. But we got to get there first.
Me too. Me too. So, Vince, that'll do it for us, man. Why don't you go ahead and take us out of here?
All right, man. Thanks to everybody for joining us on this edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Make sure you like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, because you never know when we're going to be back. Here's what I do know. We're going to be back tonight at 6 o'clock. Sean Stiers, myself, we are going to be talking, and I got my list right here. Whoop, whoop. Top 10 Notre Dame players. That's our topic for tonight. We're going to talk about the top 10 Notre Dame players in our opinion. We're going to compare notes. We're going to talk about it. And, of course, we're going to have rapid fire. So make sure you log in tonight at 6 o'clock. But, folks, thanks for joining us. Had a blast as always. We'll be back tonight at 6. Tomorrow at 1 is the Brian Show, right? That's what goes on tomorrow. So, hey, we're going to be bringing you the content every single day. So make sure you join us. But thank you very much for joining us today. For Brian, I'm Vince. And we'll talk to you next time on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.